I thought I was doing my little sister a favor. Her laptop had been acting weird, freezing, sending random emails, so I dropped it off at the repair shop on my way to check on Mom. Just another Saturday errand. Nothing special. But when the tech called me back to the counter, his hands were shaking. "Ma'am, I need you to cancel every card your family has. Tonight. And change all your locks, physical locks, passwords, everything." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't wait until Monday." I laughed. I actually laughed. I thought he was trying to upsell me on some security software. Then he turned the screen toward me. What I saw made my blood run cold. Banking records, property documents, my mother's social security number, her house deed, all of it right there on my sister's laptop in folders I'd never seen before, and beside them a spreadsheet with my mother's name highlighted in red next to the words, "Priority, active." I looked up at him. What does this mean? He met my eyes and I saw genuine fear. It means someone's not just stealing money, they're stealing your mother's house, and they're doing it right now. That was 3 hours ago. Since then, I've discovered things that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family, my sister, and the charming man from church my mother trusted. What started as a simple laptop repair became a race against a criminal network so sophisticated, so terrifyingly organized, that even the police didn't see it coming. And the worst part? The person who opened the door for them was someone I never suspected. This is the story of how I lost everything I thought was safe and fought like hell to get it back. Because some locks don't just keep danger out. Some locks reveal who you should have never let in. My name is Hannah Beck. I'm 39 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years processing insurance claims, which means I've seen every scam, every exaggeration, and every attempt to pull a fast one that you can imagine. I'm the person who reads the fine print, who asks the uncomfortable questions, who doesn't take anything at face value. It's made me good at my job, but it's also made me the family anchor, the one everyone calls when something needs fixing, when paperwork needs filing, when Mom needs someone to check on her furnace or argue with her cable company. I don't mind. Someone has to be the steady one, especially since Dad passed 2 years ago. Saturday morning, I had a list. Pick up Mom's prescriptions, drop off Emily's laptop at the repair shop, swing by the grocery store, then head to Mom's house to help her sort through some old tax documents. Simple, straightforward, done by noon. Emily had asked me 3 days earlier if I could take her laptop in because it was acting weird, her exact words, and she was buried in a freelance art project with a tight deadline. The laptop kept freezing, she said, and it had sent a couple of emails she didn't remember writing. Probably a virus from clicking on something she shouldn't have. Emily's always been a little too trusting with links and downloads, bless her heart. She's creative, spontaneous lives with her head in the clouds. I'm the opposite. I handle the practical things. The repair shop was one of those small local places tucked between a dry cleaner and a sandwich shop, the kind with a handwritten sign in the window and a bell that jingled when you walked in. I'd been there once before to get my own computer cleaned up after a hard drive crash, and the owner, Owen Price, maybe late 30s, quiet guy with glasses and a perpetually thoughtful expression, had been efficient and honest. No upselling, no nonsense. Exactly my kind of service. I set Emily's laptop on the counter and explained the symptoms while Owen wrote down the details on a repair ticket. "Freezing random emails, slow startup," he repeated, nodding. "Sounds like malware. I'll run a diagnostic and give you a call this afternoon with an estimate." Standard stuff. I thanked him, turned to leave, and was halfway to the door when he called out, "Ms. Beck, hold on a second." Something in his voice made me stop. I turned back and saw him staring at the laptop screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard like he was afraid to touch it. His face had gone pale. "Is there a problem?" I asked, walking back to the counter. He didn't answer right away. He clicked a few things, his eyes scanning the screen with increasing speed, and then he did something I didn't expect. He looked up at me with an expression I'd only seen a handful of times in my life. Fear. Real, unfiltered fear. "Ms. Beck, Whose laptop is this? My sister's. Emily Beck. Why? He swallowed hard. And does your sister have access to your mother's financial information? My stomach tightened. She helps Mom with some things, yeah. Why, what did you find? Owen turned the laptop slightly so I could see the screen, but he kept his hand on the mouse ready to click away if anyone else came in. What I saw made no sense at first, just a jumble of file folders with names like banking data, property records, and ID scans. He opened one folder, then another, and my confusion turned to ice-cold dread. Bank statements, not Emily's, my mother's. Ruth Beck's name at the top of every page, complete with account numbers, balances, transaction histories going back 6 months. Another folder contained scanned copies of documents I recognized immediately. Mom's property deed, the title to her house, her mortgage payoff letter from 2015, even her social security card. Everything you'd need to steal someone's entire financial identity, all neatly organized in folders on my little sister's laptop. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Why would Emily have all this? Owen shook his head. She probably doesn't even know it's here. Look at this. He opened another program, something that looked like a system utility, and pointed to a list of files. This is spyware. Keylogger software, remote access tools, the works. Someone installed this on her laptop probably months ago. Everything she types, every password she enters, every website she visits, it's all being recorded and sent somewhere else. And because she's been using this laptop on your mother's Wi-Fi network, the malware spread. It's been accessing your mother's devices, her email, her online banking, everything. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Who would do this? I don't know, Owen said, and his hands were shaking now as he reached for a Post-it note and a pen. But I've seen this before. This isn't some random hacker. This is targeted, organized, and based on what I'm seeing here. He clicked open a spreadsheet that made my blood run cold. Row after row of names, addresses, ages. My mother's name was highlighted in yellow with a column next to it that read, Priority, Active, and a series of dates, the most recent being today's date. Owen started writing on the Post-it, his handwriting rushed and jagged. Cancel all your mother's credit cards tonight. Change every lock in her house, physical locks, digital passwords, everything. I'm serious. Don't wait until Monday. Don't even wait until tomorrow. He underlined the words twice, then 3 times, the pen nearly tearing through the paper. Whoever's behind this has everything they need to drain her accounts and steal her property, and they're doing it right now. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him he was overreacting, that there had to be some reasonable explanation. But the look in his eyes stopped me cold. This wasn't a sales pitch. This wasn't a tech trying to scare me into buying services I didn't need. Owen Price had seen something that genuinely terrified him, and now he was trying to warn me before it was too late. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I needed to call Mom. I needed to call the bank. I needed to... The phone buzzed in my hand, a text message from Emily. Don't touch the accounts. You don't understand what's happening. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering in my chest. Owen leaned forward slightly, his voice low and urgent. Ms. Beck, he said quietly, I think you need to call the police. I didn't call the police, not yet. Instead, I grabbed my purse, left Emily's laptop with Owen, and drove straight to Mom's house with my phone buzzing non-stop in the cup holder. Emily's text message sat there unanswered, glowing accusingly every time I glanced down. I didn't know what to say to her yet, didn't know what questions to ask, or how to ask them without my voice shaking with anger and confusion. So I focused on what I could control, getting to Mom before whoever was behind this did. The drive to Ruth Beck's house took 12 minutes. 12 minutes during which my mind spun through a dozen different scenarios, each one worse than the last. The house came into view, a modest 3-bedroom ranch with white siding and blue shutters. The same house where Emily and I grew up, where Dad planted rose bushes every spring, and Mom hosted neighborhood barbecues every 4th of July. 40 years of memories lived in that house. 40 years of mortgage payments carefully saved and scrimped for finally paid off in full 3 years before Dad died. The thought that someone was trying to take it made me feel physically sick. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment trying to compose myself. Mom didn't need me storming in with accusations and panic. She needed me calm, rational, clear-headed. I took 3 deep breaths, grabbed my bag, and walked up the front steps. The spare key was still hidden under the ceramic frog by the door, the same place it had been since I was 10 years old. Some things never changed. Inside the house smelled exactly like it always did. Coffee brewing in the kitchen. Old books stacked on the side table, and something floral from the potpourri bowl Mom kept by the window. Ruth Beck was a creature of habit, and her home reflected that. Paper receipts were filed in labeled envelopes by month and year stored in a dedicated drawer in the dining room hutch. Coupons were clipped and organized by store. Bills were paid by check recorded in a ledger with a fountain pen because the internet can't lose a paper trail. She was meticulous, careful, responsible, which made what I'd seen on Emily's laptop all the more terrifying. If someone had gotten to Mom, it wasn't because she was careless. It was because someone had deliberately targeted her trust. I found her in the kitchen pouring herself a cup of coffee from the ancient percolator she refused to replace. She looked up when I came in, her face brightening the way it always did when one of her daughters showed up unannounced. Ruth Beck, 63 years old, silver hair cut in a practical bob, wearing a cardigan despite the warm weather because the house was always a little chilly. She'd been alone since Dad's heart attack 2 years ago, but she'd never seemed lonely, just quietly independent, filling her days with church on Sundays, garden club on Wednesdays, and weekly dinners with me and Emily, usually here at this same kitchen table. "Hannah, sweetheart, I didn't know you were coming by today," she said, reaching for a second mug. "Coffee." "Mom, we need to talk." I set my bag down on the counter, trying to keep my voice steady. "When's the last time you checked your bank accounts?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Oh, honey, I just checked them a few days ago. Everything's fine. Jason helped me set up that online banking thing so I can see everything right on the computer." She gestured vaguely toward the desktop in the corner of the living room, the one Dad had bought her 5 years ago, that she mostly used for email and digital photo storage. "He's been such a help. I don't know what I'd do without him." My stomach dropped. "Mom, who is Jason?" "Jason Mallory. I met him at church about 3 months ago. Such a nice man, very patient with all my questions about technology. He offered to help me set up online banking after I mentioned how frustrated I was trying to use the bank's website." She poured coffee into the second mug and slid it toward me. "You'd like him, Hannah. He reminds me of your father, always willing to help, never makes you feel silly for not understanding something." I forced myself to take a sip of coffee, using the moment to choose my words carefully. "Mom, I need you to log into your bank account right now. I need to see something." She frowned, puzzled by my tone. "Is something wrong?" "I hope not, but I need to check." She led me to the computer, moving slowly, and I could see the confusion and worry starting to creep into her expression. She sat down, opened the browser, and navigated to the bank's website with the careful, deliberate typing of someone who'd been taught recently and was still memorizing the steps. When the account screen loaded, I leaned over her shoulder and felt my worst fears confirmed. 3 pending wire transfers, each one scheduled for Monday morning. $8,000 to AD Foundation Holdings. $12,000 to the same place. $15,000. $35,000 total, nearly half of Mom's savings about to vanish into an account I'd never heard of. "Mom, what is this?" I pointed at the screen, trying to keep my voice from rising. "Did you authorize these transfers?" Ruth squinted at the screen, then relaxed, nodding. "Oh yes, that's the protected savings account Jason told me about. He said it has better interest rates and it's safer from online theft because it's held in a special kind of trust. I was going to tell you about it at dinner this week." My hands gripped the back of her chair. "Mom, this isn't a savings account. This is someone stealing your money." She turned in her seat, her face a mixture of hurt and defensiveness. "Hannah, don't be ridiculous. Jason wouldn't hurt me. He's from church. He's been helping me. I pulled out my phone and called the bank's fraud hotline, putting it on speaker so she could hear. We sat through 5 minutes of automated menus pressing numbers, confirming account details, finally reaching a human being who listened to my explanation with practiced patience. Yes, they could place a temporary hold on the pending transfers. Yes, it would take effect immediately. Yes, someone from their fraud department would call us within 24 hours to verify. When I hung up, Mom was staring at her hands, her coffee forgotten. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "Jason's been so kind." That's when my phone rang. Mom's name on the caller ID. I looked at her confused. She was sitting right next to me. Then I realized she was calling from her cell phone, which was in the other room. I answered. "Mom." Her voice came through trembling and distant. "Honey, I can't talk now. I'm at the bank with Jason and everything's fine." I was out the door before the phone call even ended, leaving the real Ruth sitting confused at her kitchen table while some impossible version of her stood inside the bank with a stranger named Jason. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. The bank was only 4 minutes away, but every red light felt like an eternity. Every slow driver an obstacle deliberately placed in my path. I kept replaying Mom's voice on the phone, calm, reassuring, telling me everything was fine when I was sitting right next to her. Someone had spoofed her number, or worse, was using her phone without her knowledge. Either way, it meant Jason had access to more than just her bank accounts. The parking lot was half full when I arrived, typical for a Saturday afternoon. I spotted Mom's car immediately, the same blue sedan she'd been driving for 8 years parked near the entrance. I pulled in 2 spaces away and practically ran through the automatic doors, my heart hammering against my ribs. The lobby was quiet, just a handful of customers waiting in the rope line for the next available teller. And there, at the far counter near the office doors, stood my mother with a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, maybe late 40s, with the kind of face that belonged in a corporate boardroom or a country club, clean-shaven, symmetrical features, wearing a crisp, light blue button-down shirt tucked into pressed khakis. Everything about him said trustworthy professional. He had one hand resting lightly on a leather portfolio and the other gesturing as he spoke to both Ruth and a young bank employee who couldn't have been more than 25. The employee kept nodding, glancing down at papers spread across the counter. I walked toward them, trying to look calm despite the adrenaline coursing through me. As I got closer, I could hear Jason's voice, smooth, measured, the kind of tone that made you want to lean in and listen. He was explaining something about account security protocols, using terms like fraudulent access patterns and temporary asset protection with the ease of someone who'd given this speech many times before. The papers on the counter caught my eye, printed documents with official-looking headers, logos I didn't recognize, but that seemed vaguely governmental or financial. The title across the top read, Elder Financial Protection Strategies, in bold letters with subsections about cybercrime prevention and secure holding accounts. It looked legitimate. It looked like something a bank might actually use. "Mom," I said, and Ruth turned her face lighting up with relief. "Oh, Hannah, thank goodness you're here. Jason was just explaining that there's been some suspicious activity on my accounts, and we need to move the funds temporarily for security. I tried to explain that you'd already called the bank, but Jason says there's more to it than that." She gestured to the man beside her. "Jason, this is my daughter Hannah. Hannah, this is Jason Mallory." Jason extended his hand with a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ms. Beck, it's good to meet you. Your mother speaks very highly of you. I understand you called the fraud department earlier. That was smart, but there are additional steps we need to take to ensure full protection." I didn't take his hand. Instead, I looked at the bank employee, a young woman whose name tag read Jessica. What exactly is happening here? Jessica glanced nervously between Jason and me. Mr. Mallory was explaining that Mrs. Beck's account was flagged for suspicious activity and that temporarily transferring her funds to a secure holding account is standard protocol in these situations. Standard protocol, I repeated, keeping my voice level. "And who flagged the account?" Jason answered before Jessica could. The bank's automated security system combined with reports from the Elder Protection Network. We work with financial institutions across the state to identify vulnerable accounts and secure them before criminals can strike. Your mother's account showed several red flags: unusual login locations, multiple password changes, attempted transfers to unfamiliar accounts. He tapped the papers on the counter. It's all documented here, including the legal framework for temporary custodial transfers. I felt someone move closer behind me and glanced back. An older woman, maybe 70, with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, had stepped out of the line and was standing just over my shoulder. She was looking at the papers on the counter with an expression I couldn't quite read. When she caught my eye, she gave me the slightest shake of her head, then deliberately shifted her gaze to the logo on Jason's documents. The woman reached forward, took a deposit slip from the counter dispenser, and wrote something quickly. She folded it once and pressed it into my hand, her fingers cold and firm. When Jason turned to address Ruth again, the woman mouthed 2 words at me. I know him. I unfolded the slip under the counter edge. The handwriting was hurried but clear. Keep all papers, call police. My pulse jumped. I looked back at the woman who had already stepped away, returning to her place in line as though nothing had happened. She wouldn't meet my eyes again, but her presence felt like a lifeline confirmation that my instincts weren't wrong. I turned my attention back to the papers Jason had spread across the counter. I'd like copies of everything, I said, my voice steady now. For our records. Jason's smile tightened slightly. Of course, transparency is essential in these matters. He slid several pages toward me. These require your mother's signature to initiate the temporary transfer. The funds will be held securely and returned to her primary account once the security review is complete, typically 7 to 10 business days. I picked up the first page, scanning quickly. Legal language filled most of it, dense paragraphs about fiduciary responsibility and asset protection. But at the bottom, in smaller print, I found the contact information for AD Foundation Holdings. An address in the next county, a phone number with a generic voicemail system, and an email address that made my blood turn to ice. Emily@beckfamily.com. My sister's email. The one she'd been using since college. The one currently sitting in my phone's contact list. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and opened the banking app I'd installed for Mom last year when I'd tried and failed to convince her to go paperless. The pending transfers were still visible temporarily on hold thanks to my earlier call. I clicked on the transaction details, and there it was, the IP address from which the transfers had been initiated. I didn't need to be a tech expert to recognize Emily's apartment complex name in the network identifier. My vision narrowed. My little sister's laptop, her email address, her network. Everything was connected to Emily. I looked up from my phone trying to process what this meant and found Jason watching me. Not Ruth, not the banker, but me. His expression had shifted, the warm professionalism replaced with something harder, more calculating. He knew I'd seen something. He was watching to see what I'd do with the information. And in that moment, I realized we were playing a game I didn't fully understand, and he was several moves ahead. I got Mom out of that bank before Jason could get her signature on anything. I told Jessica we needed time to review the documents with our family. Attorney grabbed the papers from the counter and guided Ruth toward the door with my hand firmly on her elbow. Jason didn't try to stop us, but I felt his eyes following us all the way to the parking lot. The woman from the line, my unexpected ally, gave me the smallest nod as we passed. I didn't know who she was, but I owed her everything for that moment of intervention. We drove straight back to the repair shop. Ruth was quiet in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, confusion and hurt radiating from her in waves. She didn't understand why I'd rushed her out, why I didn't trust Jason, why everything that had seemed so helpful an hour ago now felt dangerous. I didn't have good answers yet, just instinct and fear and a growing certainty that we were in far deeper trouble than I'd initially understood. Owen was waiting for us, Emily's laptop still open on his workbench. When I introduced him to Ruth, he shook her hand gently and said, "Mrs. Beck, I need to show you something and I need you to stay calm. Can you do that?" His voice had the kind of steady professionalism that came from delivering bad news regularly, and somehow that made it easier to trust him. He turned the laptop screen toward us and started explaining in the clearest, most accessible language I'd ever heard a tech person use. The software installed on Emily's computer wasn't just a simple virus. It was sophisticated spyware designed to do 3 specific things: record every single keystroke typed on the keyboard, take screenshots of whatever was displayed on the screen, and scan the local Wi-Fi network for other devices it could access. When Emily visited Ruth's house and connected to the Wi-Fi, something she did regularly, sometimes staying overnight to help with projects, or just to keep her mother company, the malware found its way onto that network, like water finding cracks in a foundation. Owen pulled up a log file that showed the malware's activity over the past 4 months. It had accessed Ruth's smart doorbell camera, the one she'd installed after a neighborhood meeting about package theft. It had connected to her digital thermostat, the kind that learns your schedule and adjusts automatically. Most alarming, it had interfaced with the electronic door lock she'd had installed last fall, the one that let her unlock her front door with a code instead of fumbling for keys when her hands were full of groceries. "Look at this," Owen said, clicking through screens that meant nothing to me but clearly horrified him. "Someone accessed your door lock history remotely. They know every time you left the house, every time you came home for the last 3 months. They pulled your thermostat data so they know when you're typically asleep. And they accessed your email through your home computer's saved passwords." He opened another folder. "These are property documents you scanned last year for your homeowner's insurance renewal, tax records, your deed. All of it pulled directly from your email attachments and saved to an external server." Ruth's face had gone pale. "Someone's been watching me in my own home." "Not with cameras," Owen clarified quickly. "But through your devices, yes. They've been monitoring your digital life for months, collecting information." That's when I shifted into the mode I knew best: practical problem solving. I asked Owen what we needed to do immediately, and he gave me a list. First, disconnect everything. We physically unplugged Ruth's Wi-Fi router, and I told her we'd set up a new network later with a completely different password. Owen recommended we replace the smart lock with a traditional deadbolt, the kind that required an actual key and couldn't be accessed remotely by anyone. Same with the doorbell camera. Get a basic peephole and a simple chime that plugged into the wall. We spent the rest of the afternoon in a whirlwind of action. I drove Ruth to the hardware store and we bought new locks, old-fashioned brass deadbolts that looked like they belonged on a house from the 1950s. The salesman who helped us install them was a retired handyman who didn't ask questions, just showed us how to use the keys properly and test the mechanisms. Then we went back to the bank, a different branch this time, nowhere near where we'd seen Jason, and sat down with a manager to freeze Ruth's accounts in person. We set up verbal passwords for any phone transactions. Random words Mom would remember, but that no one could guess from her personal information. When we got home, I helped Ruth cancel every credit card she owned and order replacements. We sat at her kitchen table with a notepad and worked through every online account she had, changing passwords to complex combinations that Owen had helped me generate. I wrote the master password on a piece of paper and locked it in the small fireproof safe Dad had kept in the bedroom closet. Ruth seemed calmer now, more in control. These were actions she understood: physical locks, paper records, face-to-face conversations with bank managers. This was security that made sense to her generation. While Ruth made us tea, I opened her email on the desktop computer with her permission. I needed to understand how deep this went. It didn't take long to find the evidence. Emily's email account had an automated rule set up, something Emily herself probably didn't even know existed. Every email containing certain keywords was being automatically forwarded to an external address I didn't recognize. I scrolled through the sent folder and my stomach turned. Copies of Ruth's driver's license forwarded. The house deed forwarded. Property tax statements forwarded. Even the code for the old alarm system Ruth had disconnected 2 years ago. My phone buzzed. A text from Owen with a photo attachment. I opened it and felt the room tilt. It was a document header professionally formatted with legal language in small print. At the top, in bold letters, "Quitclaim deed, Ruth Beck to AD Foundation Holdings. Someone was preparing to steal my mother's house. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at Ruth's kitchen table with the photo Owen had sent, staring at those words until they burned into my vision. Quitclaim deed. AD Foundation Holdings. My mother's name on a document she'd never seen, never signed, transferring ownership of the house where she'd lived for 40 years, to strangers who'd spent months worming their way into her trust. By the time the sun came up Monday morning, I'd made a list of every action I needed to take, prioritized by urgency. First on that list, the county recorder's office. I left Ruth with a neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Patricia, who'd known our family since I was in elementary school. I didn't tell Mom where I was going, or why, just that I had some paperwork to check on, and I'd be back by noon. The county building was a squat concrete structure downtown, the kind of government office that smelled like old files and floor wax. I found the recorder's office on the second floor and waited in line behind two title company representatives and a lawyer in an expensive suit. When my turn came, I handed the clerk a printed copy of Owen's photo along with Ruth's address. The woman behind the counter was maybe 60, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the efficient manner of someone who'd been doing this job for decades. Her name tag read Gloria. She typed Ruth's address into her system and frowned at the screen. "Are you family?" she asked. "I'm her daughter. Is there a problem?" Gloria rotated her monitor so I could see. "There's a quitclaim deed filed here dated 2 weeks ago. It transfers the property from Ruth Beck to AD Foundation Holdings. It was filed with what appears to be proper notarization and a valid signature. It's in the processing queue, scheduled to be recorded officially by end of business today." The room seemed to tilt. My mother didn't sign that. She doesn't even know it exists. Gloria's expression shifted from bureaucratic neutrality to concern. "You're saying this is fraudulent?" "Completely. Someone forged her signature. Someone's trying to steal her house." She clicked through several more screens, her frown deepening. "The problem is quitclaim deeds don't require much verification. They're commonly used for family transfers, estate planning, that sort of thing. The system assumes that if someone's signing over their property, especially to what looks like a legitimate foundation, it's consensual. We process hundreds of these a month. Once it's officially recorded, reversing it requires a court order and can take months, sometimes years. So someone can just steal a house with a piece of paper." My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "If they can forge a convincing signature and get a notary to certify it, yes." Gloria leaned back in her chair, studying me. "I've been working here for 15 years. This is the third case I've seen in the last 6 months with the same pattern. Elderly homeowner AD Foundation as the recipient, expedited processing request. Every time the deed looks legitimate on paper, but the families say the owner never agreed to the transfer." She wrote something on a Post-it note and slid it across the counter. "You need to file a police report immediately. Call this number. Detective Nora Cole, Financial Crimes Unit. Tell her Gloria Martinez sent you and mention AD Foundation. She'll know what it means." I took the Post-it with shaking hands. Gloria initiated an emergency hold on the deed processing, giving me 72 hours before it would automatically proceed. It wasn't much time, but it was something. I walked out to my car and sat in the driver's seat, staring at the phone number Gloria had given me. Then I dialed. Detective Nora Cole answered on the second ring with a voice that sounded like she'd spent too many years hearing stories like mine. "Financial Crimes, Cole speaking." I explained everything in a rush: the laptop, the spyware, Jason at the bank, the quitclaim deed, Gloria's referral. When I mentioned AD Foundation, Nora made a sound that was half sigh, half growl. "How many properties?" she asked. "I'm sorry. How many properties has your mother owned or transferred in the last year?" "Just the one house. She's lived there since 1985. "Then she's target profile perfect for them." Nora's voice carried the weight of experience and frustration. "Mrs. Beck, I've been tracking AD Foundation for 3 years. They've appeared in 17 similar cases across the state that I know of, probably more that haven't been reported. They target isolated seniors, usually widowed, gain their trust through community connections like churches or social groups, then access their personal documents either digitally or by physically stealing them. They use quitclaim deeds because they're fast and require minimal verification. By the time most victims realize what's happened, the property's been refinanced or sold to a third party who purchased in good faith, which makes recovery almost impossible. Can you stop them? I can try, but they operate through shell companies, offshore accounts, layers of legal protection. Every time we get close, they dissolve one entity and create another. What I need is evidence, hard evidence, linking specific people to specific fraudulent acts and witnesses willing to testify. Most victims are too traumatized or embarrassed to come forward. If your mother's willing to fight this, she could be the key to bringing down the whole operation. She'll fight, I said, and meant it. What do we do first? Meet me at the station in an hour. Bring every piece of documentation you have. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Emily. I'd been avoiding her calls all weekend, too angry and confused to hear whatever explanation she might offer. But now with Detective Cole on the line and the weight of this investigation settling on my shoulders, I couldn't avoid her anymore. Detective, I have to go. I'll be there in an hour. I switched calls, and Emily's voice came through immediately tight with tears. Hannah, please. I need to explain, but you're not going to like what I have to say. I told Emily to meet me at the coffee shop on Maple Street, the one halfway between her apartment and the police station, where I was supposed to meet Detective Cole. I needed to hear her explanation before I involved law enforcement, needed to understand whether my little sister was a victim or an accomplice. The drive over gave me 10 minutes to cycle through every emotion I'd been suppressing since Saturday: anger, betrayal, fear, and underneath it all, a desperate hope that there was an explanation that would make sense of this nightmare. Emily was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table far from the windows. She looked terrible. Her eyes were swollen and red, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was gripping a paper coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to the chair. When she saw me, her face crumpled and fresh tears started falling. I sat down across from her and waited. I didn't trust myself to speak first. I didn't know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Hannah, I swear to God I didn't know what they were doing. I thought I was just trying to build my career. Start from the beginning, I said, keeping my tone neutral. When did this start? She took a shaky breath and began. Last year, around March of 2024, she'd been trying to sell her artwork online and had joined an online forum for independent artists. It was a legitimate community, or at least it seemed that way, thousands of members sharing tips about galleries' pricing marketing. A few weeks after joining, she received a private message from someone claiming to be a gallery consultant named Marcus Hale. He said he'd seen her portfolio and was impressed, thought her work had real commercial potential. He asked thoughtful questions about her artistic process, her influences, her goals. For someone like Emily, who'd been struggling to make a living from her art for years, the attention was intoxicating. Marcus offered to mentor her to help her set up proper business systems so she could track sales and manage customer relationships professionally. He sent her software, a program he called an order management system, and walked her through installing it. He said it would help her organize her inventory, track which pieces sold, best manage email communications with potential buyers. Emily installed it without question. Why wouldn't she? Marcus had been nothing but helpful, professional, encouraging. The software looked legitimate, had a clean interface, seemed to do exactly what he promised. I used it for everything, Emily said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Every email I sent to galleries, every invoice I created, every time I logged into my bank account to check if a payment had cleared. And I worked from Mom's house all the time, especially last summer when my air conditioning broke. I'd spend whole weekends there using her Wi-Fi, backing up my files to the cloud. Her voice broke. I led them right to her. I felt my anger wavering, replaced by a sick understanding. Emily wasn't sophisticated about technology. She was an artist who'd been targeted by people who knew exactly how to exploit someone like her, ambitious, trusting, desperate for validation and success. "There's more," she said, and the guilt in her voice made my stomach clench. 3 months ago, Mom mentioned she was worried about her property taxes going up. She was stressed about it, saying she didn't know how she'd manage on her fixed income if they kept increasing. I wanted to help. I asked if I could borrow her property documents to research tax relief programs for seniors. She scanned everything for me, the deed, tax statements, even her driver's license for age verification. Emily's hands were shaking now. I uploaded them to what I thought was a state assistance website. Marcus had sent me the link, said it was a database where I could check if Mom qualified for any programs. I thought I was helping her. I thought I was being a good daughter. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. The scanned documents in Emily's cloud storage. The mentor, who had access to everything she typed and every file she saved. The sophisticated operation that had been watching and waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. "I didn't figure it out until you texted me Saturday," Emily continued. I went back through my messages with Marcus, really looked at them for the first time, and I realized how carefully he'd manipulated me. Every question was designed to get information. Every suggestion led me to install something or upload something or give access to something. And then when you said there was spyware on my laptop, I knew. I knew it was him, and I knew I'd been the one who let him in. I reached across the table and took her hand. She looked up at me, surprised. "You're a victim too," I said quietly. "You didn't do this. They did this to you, and they used you to get to Mom." Before Emily could respond, my phone rang. "Detective Cole." I answered and put it on speaker so Emily could hear. "Ms. Beck, we have a situation," Nora said without preamble. "I've been monitoring the e-notary scheduling system as part of my investigation into AD Foundation. There's an appointment scheduled for tonight at 8 p.m. for a notarization service at your mother's address. The client listed is Ruth Beck, and the document type is listed as property transfer verification. They're planning to create another version of that deed, probably with a more convincing forgery this time." My blood went cold. "What do we do?" "I'm setting up a response team now. We need to—" Nora's voice cut off, and I heard her speaking to someone else in the background. When she came back on the line, her tone was urgent. "They just moved the appointment. It's not at 8. It's at 6 o'clock. That's in 2 hours. Emily grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. I looked at the clock on the wall. 4:07 p.m. "We need to get to Mom's house," I said. "Now." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's signature floating over a fake deed, and Emily's pale face as she said she only wanted to help. When the first light came through the curtains, I made coffee strong enough to peel paint and told myself it was time to stop reacting and start organizing. If these people wanted to come for my family, they would find a wall of preparation waiting for them. By 8 a.m., I had a list written on yellow paper, each step numbered and underlined like a battle plan. Mom watched from her kitchen chair, her hands folded in her lap. "You look just like your father when you get that look," she said softly. "He used to make lists before every storm." I smiled and handed her a pen. "Then let's get through this one together." We started at the credit bureau offices, the kind of places most people never visit in person anymore. I drove while Mom clutched her purse like it was armor. She didn't understand everything I was doing, but she trusted me enough to sign each form and answer every question. We froze her credit across all 3 bureaus and requested that any future unfreeze must be done through written mail, no online exceptions. It felt old-fashioned, but that was the point. Each letter would leave a paper trail. When the clerk handed us stamped copies, I put them into a folder marked "Finished" and double-checked that it stayed in my bag. From there, we stopped at her bank. I added myself as the dual authorization contact on every account, ensuring that any withdrawal above $500 would require my confirmation by phone. I set my number as the emergency alert for every card, and made sure her voicemail now played my recorded message. "If this is about an urgent transaction for Ruth Beck, please call Hannah Beck directly." After the paperwork marathon, I drove us to an electronics store. Mom kept asking if she really needed cameras. "Not the kind you're thinking of," I said. "No internet, no apps, no one outside this house ever gets to see this footage." I bought a set of small plug-in cameras that saved footage directly to SD cards. Each one could record 24 hours of video before looping back like a security diary that never left the house. Back home, I showed her how to pop the card out and slide it into the tiny viewer screen. "See, you don't even need Wi-Fi. You're in control." She smiled a little, something I hadn't seen since all this started. We placed one camera facing the back door, one in the hallway, and one near the front porch. Then I printed a short checklist for her dates for card changes, password updates, and a reminder to test the door locks once a week. I taped it inside her pantry, right next to the flour jar she used daily. Passwords were next. Technology had always made Mom nervous. She kept hers on scraps of paper stuffed into a recipe box. I knew we needed something she could remember, but no one could guess. "Pick a line from your favorite hymn," I said, "and add the year you first sang it." She chose Blessed Assurance, smiling at the memory of choir practice in 1971. We turned it into a passphrase with numbers and punctuation, writing it down neatly in a small notebook labeled Songs of Safety. She laughed at the title, and for the first time the fear in her eyes softened. I locked the notebook in the fireproof safe and handed her the spare key. "You're still the keeper of your home," I said. "I'm just making sure the doors stay shut for the wrong people." By early afternoon, every major step was photographed, cataloged, and backed up in both a binder at my apartment and a second copy stored in a sealed envelope at Mom's church office. It might have looked excessive, but I'd spent years in corporate finance. I knew chaos died in the face of documentation. I took photos of every signed form, labeled them with time and date, and emailed a summary report to Detective Cole. "If they ever try this again," I wrote, "we'll have a timeline stronger than any lie." When Mara arrived, I was still sorting receipts. She carried a manila folder under her arm and the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from work, but from grief that never found justice. She sat down, accepted the coffee I offered, and opened the folder. Inside were printed articles, old property transfer records, and handwritten notes with color-coded tabs. "I've been following him for 3 years," she said, her voice low but steady. "Jason Mallory. My mother was one of his first victims." The words hit me like cold water. She explained that in 2022 her mother had signed similar protective paperwork. Within a month, her house was gone, sold under an LLC called Safe Haven Realty, one of Jason's old shells. Her mother never recovered, dying of a stroke while trying to fight eviction. "I promised her I'd make someone pay," Mara said. She showed me clippings from local newspapers, charity events, donation drives, and church picnics. Jason always appeared in the background, his hand resting on a widow's shoulder. Within months of each event, that woman's home either transferred ownership or went into foreclosure. "He doesn't steal money directly," Mara explained. "He steals trust. Then the paperwork does the rest." She had addresses, timelines, even photos of Jason standing beside a woman named Avery Dawson at a senior outreach banquet 2 years ago. "That's the only time I've seen him with someone consistently. She's older, polished, the kind of woman people automatically respect. I think she runs him or they run it together." Mara's file was the missing piece I hadn't known to look for. Everything she said fit the pattern of my mother's near miss, right down to the fake protective transfer and the promise of safety. When she finished, I sat in silence. The house felt too still, too fragile. Outside, the afternoon light cut sharp lines across the table. Mom had been sitting quietly through it all, her teacup long forgotten in her hands. "I just wanted to believe people are good," she said finally, almost to herself. There was no bitterness in her tone, just heartbreak, the soft collapse of a lifetime of faith in human decency. I moved beside her, took her trembling hand and said, "They are good, Mom. Most of them are. But being careful doesn't make you unkind. It makes you wise. You don't owe anyone blind trust." She looked up at me then, and I saw something change in her posture, a straightening of the spine, a quiet resolve. "Then I guess it's time I learned the new rules," she said. The woman who had always signed holiday cards with perfect cursive now looked ready to sign an affidavit if it came to that. Mara closed her folder and studied us both. "You're stronger than most," she said softly. "That's why you might actually stop them." Then she reached into her bag again, pulling out a second folder thicker than the first. The manila edges were worn from handling. She placed it on the table between us like it was a live wire. "You need to see this," she said, her eyes locking on mine. "It's about Jason and someone named Avery Dawson." Mara slid the second folder toward me like she was setting down evidence that might burn through the table if we left it untouched for too long. I hesitated, my fingertips brushing the worn cardboard before I pulled it closer. Inside were old newspaper clippings, each page yellowed and soft at the edges, the ink faded but still legible enough to tell a story. The earliest one was from 5 years ago, a community piece in the Sunday edition of the Times-Herald. A grief support group at St. Mary's Fellowship Hall captioned "Neighbors Healing Together." In the photo, Jason stood near the back of the group, his hand on the shoulder of a woman whose name, according to the caption, was Edith Laramie, widowed the month before. His smile was sympathetic, practiced. Around him were other familiar faces, all older women, all newly alone. My pulse thudded as I flipped to the next clipping. There he was again 3 months later, shaking hands with another widow at a charity bake sale. Then another photo, same polite expression, different woman, same story. Mara's notes were meticulous. She had cross-referenced every woman's name with county property records color-coded by date. "I've been building this pattern for years," she said quietly, leaning over my shoulder. "Every one of these women met him in a church or a senior center. Every one had property in her own name. And within 3 to 8 months of showing up in a photo with him, their houses were sold off or transferred in what looks like a quick sale." She tapped one clipping with her pen. "He uses the same language every time, helping them downsize safely, protecting their assets from scammers. The irony kills me." I studied the dates. 7 women, 3 deceased. 4 relocated out of state, financially drained but too ashamed to come forward. Mara had drawn red lines between their addresses on a printed map, all within a 90-mile radius. Each red X felt like a small grave marker. "This isn't random," I said, my voice catching on the words. Mara nodded. "No. It's a system. He scouts for grief and loneliness like it's a business model. The precision of it chilled me, the social events, the gentle introductions, the photo ops that gave his presence legitimacy. I could picture the rhythm of his work appear helpful. Earn trust, insert legalese. No one wants to read and vanish with signatures before anyone questions the fine print. The newspaper photos weren't trophies. They were breadcrumbs he never thought anyone would follow. As I continued flipping, my eye caught a woman in the background of one of the older photos, a silver-haired figure in a soft gray suit standing near the refreshment table. She wasn't the focus, just a blur of composure and pearls, the kind of presence you register only in hindsight. But she was there again in another photo, then another. Always at the edge, never central. Her posture was perfect, her expression calm, like someone who knew she belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. Mara pointed her out before I could speak. "I didn't notice her the first time either," she said. But when I started running reverse image searches, the same woman popped up over and over. Avery Dawson. The name had weight, the kind that sounded almost invented. She's listed as the executive director of AD Foundation Holdings. Mara continued flipping to a printout of an online directory. That's the same foundation Jason told one of his victims was helping her relocate. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Then I looked deeper. She showed me a state licensing record, its header stamped in official blue, broker's license, revoked notarization, irregularities, and document fraud. I scanned the lines. 12 years ago, Avery Dawson had lost her real estate license for notarizing signatures without the signers being present. It was the clean, bureaucratic phrasing of something far uglier. She made people legally agree to things they never saw. After the revocation, she vanished. No address, No new employment filings, no tax records for nearly 6 years. Then suddenly she reappeared as a nonprofit director leading an organization dedicated to assisting seniors in housing transitions. The irony was nauseating. Mara handed me printed tax filings, their language vague and charitable. Assistance to seniors in housing transitions, support for downsizing, consultation for financial safety. On paper, it read like something you'd want your parents to join. But the numbers told a different story. Minimal donations, irregular disbursements, and property holdings that made no sense for a nonprofit of its size. The assets section listed multiple residential properties in 3 different states, with acquisition values curiously low, often less than half the market estimate. I pulled the folded quitclaim deed from my own file, the one nearly used to take my mother's house. The letterhead read, AD Foundation Holdings in neat serif type. I slid it beside the tax filing on the table. The logos were identical, same stylized interlocking letters, same tagline beneath helping seniors transition with dignity. The neat symmetry of the fraud made my stomach turn. It's the same organization, I said. The same people. Mara nodded grimly. They've built a whole identity around benevolence, and they're hiding in plain sight. I called Detective Nora Cole, my voice shaking with urgency. She listened as I laid everything out: the photos, the property records, the revoked license, the nonprofit front. Within an hour, she called back with confirmation from a financial analyst in her department. You're not going to like this, she said. AD Foundation Holdings has ownership records for 17 properties across 3 states, all acquired via quitclaim deeds, all from elderly single women. The timing matches the same months Jason appeared in those news photos. My throat went dry, and the money, Nora exhaled audibly, moved fast. Each property sold or refinanced within a year. The proceeds went through a chain of accounts that end offshore Bermuda, the Isle of Man, places designed to make the trail vanish. On paper, the foundation looks squeaky clean, valid nonprofit registration, annual filings, even a mission statement about protecting seniors. But this isn't charity. It's a laundering mechanism wrapped in virtue. I thought of the sermons Mom used to quote about wolves in sheep's clothing, how the most dangerous predators were the ones who smiled. Mara leaned back in her chair, arms folded, exhaustion settling over her like dust. They've professionalized the con, she said. Every document is technically legal, every transfer voluntary, at least that's what the paperwork says. Her voice cracked. You can't fight paperwork with emotion. You need evidence, and even then it's uphill. I felt a pulse of anger that burned clean, not wild. Then we'll make a paper trail stronger than theirs. I spread the clippings, property lists, and nonprofit filings across the table, taking photos of each. Every woman's story deserved to be seen in sequence to show the rhythm of exploitation repeating itself with mechanical precision. Behind each smiling newspaper photo was the same shadow, a man pretending to be kind and a woman pretending not to exist. And behind them, both a corporation pretending to save lives while it devoured them. The afternoon light dimmed into the soft gold of early evening. Mom had fallen asleep in the armchair, her hands still clasped around a rosary, the faintest trace of peace on her face for the first time in weeks. I promised silently that no one would take her home, not while I could still breathe. Mara started gathering her papers, methodical and quiet. I texted Nora one more image, the logo match between the deed and the tax filing, and waited for her reply. The phone buzzed almost instantly. Got it, she wrote. We're moving to surveillance. Don't leave your mom's house tonight. A few minutes later, her voice came through the line, low and urgent, background static hissing. Hannah, we've got eyes on them. My heartbeat spiked. Them, I asked. Then I heard the words that pulled the air straight out of my lungs. Jason just arrived at the notary location, Nora said, and Avery's waiting in a parked car outside. The plan came together faster than I expected, the kind of precise choreography that made you think nothing could go wrong. Nora briefed me and the officers in a low-lit conference room, a pot of stale coffee between us, and a whiteboard filled with times and names. The notary office was a small storefront next to a dry cleaner on Chestnut Street, open late for people who worked long shifts. Jason had booked an evening appointment for a trust verification. That was the bait. The decoy officer Myers was close enough in build and coloring to pass as my mother under dim lighting. They'd dressed her in one of Ruth's old-style floral cardigans and a soft blue scarf to match the one in her driver's license photo. She would carry a file of blank papers, nod politely, and let Jason speak first. The real Ruth was nowhere near the scene. I had insisted on that. She sat beside me at the station, her hands gripping a styrofoam cup of tea that had long gone cold. I kept reminding her she was safe, but my own pulse was hammering too loudly to make the words believable. From the feed on the monitor, the setup looked calm and controlled. Unmarked cars lined both ends of the street, their headlights off. 2 plainclothes officers sat inside the waiting area posing as customers, one scrolling through his phone, the other pretending to fill out forms. The notary, a woman named Candace, was cooperating. She'd agreed to leave the audio live and play her role without tipping Jason off. Everything was recorded, every angle covered. Nora paced behind the tech desk, arms folded, eyes glued to the main screen. "We'll let him make the pitch," she said. "He has to cross the line himself. Intent, not entrapment." It sounded clean surgical, catch him with his hand halfway in the drawer but before anything went missing. I told myself that once we had this, Avery's web would start to unravel. At 7:53, the door opened and Jason walked in like a man who had nowhere to be but everywhere to control. His hair was slicked back, his portfolio tucked under his arm, every motion unhurried. He smiled at Candace, exchanged a few words about the weather, and signed the check-in log. Watching him on the feed made my skin crawl. There was a gentleness in his manner that I knew by now was rehearsed to perfection. He waited as another customer left one of Nora's people before Candace called Mrs. Beck. Officer Myers stood up holding the file and gave a polite nod. Jason turned toward her with practiced warmth. Everything about him radiated trustworthiness, the soft voice, the slight lean forward, the kind of eye contact that pretends to see only you. Then his phone buzzed. It was subtle, just a vibration he could have ignored. But I saw the change ripple through him before he even looked down, the slight tightening around his jaw, the flicker of something sharp behind his calm eyes. He pulled the phone from his jacket pocket, glanced at the screen, and every trace of charm vanished. His smile flattened. He muttered a quick apology, something about a family emergency, and started backing away. Officer Myers tried to stall him. "This won't take long," she said, her voice careful, casual. Jason shook his head, gripping the portfolio tighter. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come." He walked out before anyone could stop him. On the monitors, Nora's team shifted into motion voices, layering over the radio orders to hold positions to let him step into the open before moving. Jason crossed the parking lot, phone still in hand, the glow from the screen lighting his face. He stopped by the curb and looked up. For a split second, he stared directly at one of the unmarked cars, the one across from the nail salon, and I swear he smirked. The body cam footage from Officer Myers caught a fleeting image of his phone screen as he turned 2 words in bold text. "Abort. House compromised." Then he slipped into the passenger seat of a silver sedan that had been idling near the curb. The camera zoomed in just long enough for us to see who was behind the wheel. Avery. Her silver hair glinted under the streetlight as she accelerated away before the nearest patrol could even start its engine. "Damn it," Nora hissed, slamming her hand against the desk. Officers reported back one by one, no pursuit, no identification beyond the plates, which were stolen. Within 3 minutes, the entire operation collapsed into static. All that careful choreography undone by one text message. I felt the air go out of the room. Beside me, Ruth whispered, "They knew." It wasn't a question. She said it like she'd known it all along, like she'd expected the world to outsmart the good guys. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I couldn't make myself say it. Nora's expression was carved in stone as she ordered everyone back to the station. "We regroup," she said. "Now." Back in the briefing room, the glow from the monitors made everyone look pale. Nora stood at the front, her hands on the table, head bowed. "There were 6 people who knew this plan," she said quietly. 6 including me. No emails, no radio chatter until an hour before. That means someone in this room or someone watching us is feeding information out. The silence that followed felt heavier than shouting. I could feel the tension tighten like wire, every officer avoiding each other's eyes. "Could they have tapped your comms?" I asked. Nora shook her head. "No open frequencies tonight. It wasn't random. They knew the time, the location, even which car was ours. It was one thing to know the enemy was smart. It was another to realize they were inside your walls." Nora dismissed the team one by one, sending them home under the pretense of rest, while she stayed behind with 2 trusted techs to review the recordings. I sat on the edge of the table watching her replay the moment Jason's demeanor changed. She paused, the video zoomed in on his face. "He gets the text before she moves," she murmured. "Avery didn't warn him. Someone else did. Someone who heard us planning it." She rubbed her temples. "I'll start internal review tomorrow. I can't afford paranoia, but I can't afford trust either." By the time Ruth and I left the station, the air outside had cooled to a sharp chill that cut through my jacket. The streets were mostly empty, just the hum of traffic lights and the faint buzz of neon from the diner down the block. Mom was quiet during the drive home, staring out the window. When I pulled into her driveway, I checked the locks twice before helping her inside. The house felt too still, too neat. The faint scent of lavender polish hung in the air from the cleaning we'd done that morning. I told Mom to rest, that I'd do one last sweep before bed. I walked through each room methodically, the kitchen, the hallway, the back door, checking every corner we'd already checked before. Everything looked untouched. But when I passed the fireplace, something caught the light. A tiny glint behind the framed photo of my father holding Emily and me as kids. I reached up, lifted the frame from the mantel, and froze. Nestled in the carved wood trim was a pinhole lens no bigger than a bead. It wasn't one of our cameras. It was newer, sleeker, still warm to the touch, as if it had been placed there recently. My stomach turned cold. Someone had been watching us the entire time, even through our precautions. And whoever they were, they already knew our next move before we did. I stood there staring at the tiny lens as if it might blink back at me. The living room was silent except for the faint tick of the wall clock every second, landing like a drop of water in a bucket that was already overflowing. I didn't touch the camera right away. I just stared at it, feeling the cold realization crawl up the back of my neck. Whoever had planted it hadn't just broken into our home, they had been watching us live our lives, listening to our conversations, seeing the moments when we thought we were safe. I called Owen first, my voice shaking in a way I hadn't heard since the day Dad died. He said he'd be there in 20 minutes. I didn't tell Mom right away. I didn't want her to panic until we knew how deep it went. I only told her that Owen was coming to check the locks again, which wasn't exactly a lie. When he arrived, he didn't waste time on greetings. He unpacked a small black case filled with tools I couldn't name, meters, handheld scanners, something that looked like a television remote crossed with a stethoscope. He started with the mantle, photographing the hidden camera before removing it carefully with gloved hands. He powered it on and frowned when nothing happened. "Battery's dead," he said. "Has been for a while." I watched him connect it to a portable power source. The indicator light flickered once, then nothing. "This one hasn't transmitted in at least 8 weeks. Probably a cheap Wi-Fi model sold online." His brow furrowed deeper. "What's odd is the battery. It's factory default, like it was never even activated." He looked at me, puzzled. "Did you notice anyone trying to install something like this?" Before I could answer, Mom's voice floated from behind us. "That one's mine." We both turned. She was standing in the doorway, clutching her robe. Her face wasn't fearful. It was calm, almost embarrassed. "I bought it on the internet after reading about scams against seniors. I wanted to see if Jason would react to it." I blinked, speechless for a moment. "You did what?" She smiled faintly, the corners of her mouth trembling. "I hid it there before he came over that afternoon. I thought if he asked about it or tried to remove it, I'd know he had something to hide. But he didn't even glance at it, so I thought maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I'd gotten too suspicious. She sank into the armchair, rubbing her hands together. Guess I wasn't suspicious enough. Owen gave a small nod, half impressed, half concerned. You've got good instincts, Mrs. Beck, he said. But if this one's yours, we've still got a problem. I'm picking up another signal that's active right now. He turned the handheld scanner slowly, and a faint ping came through his earpiece. The signal strength increased as he moved toward the kitchen. It's not Wi-Fi, he muttered, more like a low-frequency RF transmitter. He paused beneath the ceiling vent above the table where Mom always paid her bills. There, he said. He pulled a small screwdriver from his kit and unscrewed the vent cover. I held my breath as he reached inside and withdrew a black object the size of a matchbox wrapped in insulating tape, a wire trailing from it into the ductwork. He powered up his tablet and showed me the feed. My stomach flipped. It was the view of our kitchen table, clear and live, the angle perfectly centered on where Mom kept her folders and checkbook. Mom gasped. That's where I sit every morning, she whispered. Owen nodded grimly. This one isn't yours. It's hardwired into the ceiling, running through the vent. Battery backup wireless transmission. Whoever set this up knew what they were doing. He traced the wiring through the duct into the pantry wall, following it to a point behind the refrigerator. Whoever installed it must have had access to your attic, he said. Let's check up there. I followed him up the narrow pull-down ladder, my heart hammering in my chest. The attic smelled of insulation and dust. Owen swept his flashlight slowly across the beams until it caught a glint of metal behind the insulation, another small device blinking faintly. He pulled the fiberglass aside to reveal a receiver unit, its antenna aimed toward the back of the house. Found your broadcast hub, he said quietly. This is where the signal's going out. Mom climbed halfway up the ladder, her voice trembling. Jason was up there, she said suddenly. Last spring after the storm took down the internet. He said he was improving my Wi-Fi signal. I remember because he was up there almost an hour. He said he was repositioning the router and running a new booster. She swallowed hard. I didn't think twice about it. Owen crouched beside the receiver, examining the wiring. This is a separate network, he said. It's not connected to your router at all. It's broadcasting on a hidden frequency, piggybacking on your house's power line. That's why none of your devices could see it. He shook his head, frustration etched in every line of his face. This isn't amateur stuff. Someone planned this months ahead, knew exactly how to stay invisible. I looked down at Mom, who was gripping the ladder rail so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her eyes were shiny, but not with fear, with something like fury. When we went back downstairs, she sat at the kitchen table and folded her hands together. I started getting nervous about him 6 weeks ago, she said quietly. He asked questions that didn't feel right. About where I keep my insurance papers, whether I had a safety deposit box, whether I'd ever considered simplifying my estate. She looked up at me, shame flickering across her face. I didn't tell you because I was afraid you'd think I was losing it. You know how older people sound when they say things like that, paranoid? That's what I was trying not to be. She gestured toward the dead camera on the mantel. That silly thing was my test. I thought maybe if I was wrong, I could put it away and laugh about it. But I guess I wasn't wrong. I sat beside her and took her hand. You were protecting yourself, I said. That's not paranoia. That's survival. Her grip tightened. Then why do I feel foolish instead of safe? She whispered. I didn't have an answer. Maybe because that's what people like Jason wanted, to make women like her doubt themselves until they stopped trusting their own instincts. I looked over at Owen, who was crouched beside the refrigerator, connecting his laptop to the receiver. Lines of code and signal data filled the screen. It's still transmitting, he said softly. Whoever's on the other end is watching this feed right now. He started typing, isolating the connection, preparing to shut it down. I could hear the faint hum of his cooling fan, the rapid clatter of keys. Then, just as he hit the command, the feed flickered. The signal strength dropped from full to zero in an instant. Owen froze. "It went offline," he said. "Not from my end remotely." I leaned closer, staring at the screen as the final log line appeared, disconnected by remote host. The air in the kitchen felt suddenly heavier, the kind of stillness that follows a slammed door. Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "Does that mean what I think it means?" Owen looked at us, his expression grim. "Someone was watching this feed live," he said, "and they just saw us find it." After the signal went dead, Owen packed up his gear and told us he'd return in the morning with a specialist from Nora's cyber unit. I barely slept that night, and neither did Mom. Every creak in the house felt like a whisper we couldn't hear clearly enough to interpret. When morning finally came, I called Mara and asked her to meet me at my apartment, where I still kept the binder of everything we'd gathered so far. If someone had eyes inside Mom's home, we needed to work somewhere we could still believe in the concept of privacy. By noon, my dining table looked like a small war room. Papers, laptops, printed property records, and cups of black coffee that went cold as soon as we set them down. We decided to go wide instead of deep, mapping every piece of data across time and geography. Mara opened a fresh spreadsheet and began entering names her mother, my mother, and the 5 other women she had already tracked from her earlier research. We added birth years, marital status, and the dates their husbands passed away. The pattern emerged almost immediately. All were widows between 58 and 71. All had been approached by someone helpful, a kind stranger at church, a volunteer from a community program, or a financial advisor recommended by a friend within 6 months of their husband's death. Every one of them owned their home outright, and every one of them had either sold below value or signed a quitclaim deed that transferred ownership to an entity linked to AD Foundation Holdings. Mara leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen. "They're timing it," she said. "They wait for the grief window when everything feels too heavy to manage alone." I nodded. The emotional toll was written between the rows: Edith Laramie, deceased 11 months after her husband. Sandra Feldman moved in with her daughter in New Mexico after losing everything. 2 others now in assisted living bills paid by children who never knew what really happened. The financial losses ranged from $180,000 to over $800,000. But the emotional damage couldn't be quantified. Grief had made them visible to predators pretending to be helpers. Seeing my mother's name in that spreadsheet among them made my chest tighten. "It's a list of good people," I said quietly. "That's what makes it work." As we worked through each case, I kept circling back to the organizations involved, the church groups, the newsletters, the local charities that kept popping up in their stories. I started scanning donation records and newsletters for patterns, and that's when I found it. Every one of these women had donated to a single local charity within 2 months before being approached Community Care Circle. I remembered the name immediately. They hosted grief support luncheons and meal deliveries for recent widows. Mom had mentioned them once, even saved a flyer with a smiling photo of volunteers holding casseroles. I opened the charity's website, scrolling down to the board of directors. My stomach turned cold. There she was listed near the bottom in soft blue font, Avery Dawson, Volunteer Coordinator. "Mara," I said, turning the laptop toward her. She froze when she saw the name. "That's how she found them," I continued. She didn't have to guess who was vulnerable. She had access to the donation list names, addresses, even notes about their spouse's passing. Mara clicked through archived newsletters. Each issue had a donor appreciation column complete with addresses for sending thank you cards. She used a grief charity as a hunting ground, I said. The realization felt like a gut punch. All those women who believed they were helping their community had unknowingly handed Avery a roadmap of their pain. I called Nora immediately. She put me on speaker with her forensic accountant, a calm man named Berman, who spoke in precise, clipped sentences. "We've been tracing the financial channels behind AD Foundation," he said. "It's not just one foundation, it's a network." He explained that every property acquired under the foundation's name was refinanced or sold within months. The money moved through a sequence of limited liability companies registered in Delaware and Nevada, each with opaque ownership structures. The funds exit those LLCs as consultant fees or administrative reimbursements, then disappear into offshore accounts, he said. Bermuda, Guernsey, a few other tax havens. It's sophisticated. These aren't simple con artists, they're laundering large-scale assets. Mara's face tightened as she listened. Can we prove Avery's direct involvement? Berman hesitated. Not yet. On paper, everything she touches looks clean. The money never sits under her name, but she's at the front of the funnel, the contact point. The victims sign papers she arranges, and once the property transfers, the paperwork vanishes into the shell network. Nora broke in. We've already looped in the State Financial Crimes Unit. This is too big for local jurisdiction. If we can tie the charity to the property pipeline, the feds will open a case. She paused. But until then, we need to keep your mother safe. They know she's not just another mark anymore. When the call ended, the room felt heavier. I stared at the spreadsheet on Mara's laptop. 8 names, 8 stories that fit together like a puzzle no one wanted to solve. For the first time, the scale of it hit me, not just my mother or Mara's, but dozens more we probably hadn't found yet. This wasn't a scam. It was an enterprise built on the most predictable human truth, loneliness. Mara rubbed her temples. You realize, she said quietly, if Avery's tied to Community Care Circle, then she's probably still attending meetings. Recruiting. The thought of her sitting among real volunteers smiling, collecting sympathy from the same kind of women she'd ruined, made my skin crawl. That night I drove back to Mom's house with the binder in my lap. The roads were slick with rain streetlights reflecting off the pavement in long silver lines. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked peaceful again, the curtains drawn, the porch light glowing warm yellow. I almost convinced myself it was over for the night, that we'd contained the threat inside our spreadsheet. But as soon as I stepped inside, I saw something on the floor just beyond the entryway, a plain white envelope hand-delivered through the mail slot. My heart dropped before I even picked it up. The bold black type across the front read, "Final notice, please vacate in 30 days." I tore it open with shaking hands. Inside was a printed form on legal letterhead citing a transfer of property rights to AD Foundation Holdings. The same logo, the same signature line as before. My vision blurred as I realized what it meant. They hadn't just watched us. They were already one step ahead again. Mom's house. Her sanctuary was back on their ledger, and this time the paperwork said it was no longer hers. The envelope was still in my hands when Nora arrived. She didn't knock, just stepped inside with that grim efficiency she carried like armor. I laid the paper on the kitchen table and watched her eyes scan the words, her jaw tightening with each line. "They've filed it," she said, finally exhaling through her nose. "But that doesn't mean it's too late." Mom was sitting at the table trying to make sense of the official language printed in neat, merciless type. "I never signed anything," she said softly, more to herself than to either of us. "How can they just say it's theirs?" Nora pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "That's exactly what we're going to stop. But first you need to understand how they're doing it." She spoke the way a teacher might explain something to a class of adults who didn't ask to be there but needed to know. "Property theft isn't like what you see in movies," she began. "No crowbars, no break-ins. It happens with paper or now PDFs. The easiest way is through something called a quitclaim deed. It's basically a document that says, I, the owner, give this property to someone else. And it doesn't even promise the title is clear. It just transfers whatever ownership exists. Normally it's used between family members or for small trust adjustments. Because it's meant for personal use, it doesn't go through the same verification steps as a sale. She tapped the form with her pen. That's why it's dangerous. If someone forges your signature, finds a notary willing to stamp it or one who doesn't ask too many questions and files it with the county, the system accepts it as valid. The law assumes no one would give away their home unless they meant to. It's built for efficiency, not protection. Mom looked stunned. "You mean they can just sign my name?" Nora nodded. "And once it's recorded, It's official. The title updates. You still live here, but on paper, it belongs to them. By the time most victims find out the property's been sold or refinanced, fixing it takes months, sometimes years of legal battles. That's why we have to stop this before it finishes processing. She leaned back, folding her hands. Right now, what we need is an emergency court order, a temporary restraining order or TRO that freezes the title until the investigation's complete. It'll stop any further filings and preserve your ownership. I'd spent enough time in finance to understand the weight of paperwork, but hearing it reduced to this, a system so trusting it made people vulnerable, was infuriating. What do we need to get the order? I asked. Nora was already pulling forms from her briefcase. Evidence. Everything we've got that proves your mother never authorized the transfer. That part at least I could help with. While she contacted the county prosecutor's office, I opened my laptop and began building the evidence packet like it was a corporate audit. Owen's photos of the hidden cameras, his report showing the spyware that traced back to Emily's laptop, screenshots of the fraudulent emails, the spreadsheet Mara and I built with victim data, and Mom's written statement signed and dated declaring she never signed or agreed to any property transfer. Nora spoke into her phone while I printed and sorted. We need to halt deed processing immediately, she said to whoever was on the other end. Yes, emergency basis. The property is 1422 West Hickory. The fraudulent deed was filed this week. She listened for a moment, then looked at me. They'll push it to a judge for review today. We'll know within 48 hours. I could hear the edge of urgency she was trying to hide. Even 2 days could be the difference between stopping a crime and trying to undo one. Emily arrived that afternoon, pale and quiet but determined. She sat down beside Mom, her laptop clutched to her chest like a lifeline. I have something that might help, she said. Her voice was steadier than I expected. She opened her computer and pulled up a folder labeled Mentor. Inside were voice memos, text logs, and screenshots of her conversations with the man who'd called himself Dylan. I recognized the manipulation in his tone, even from snippets, compliments about her artwork, gradual suggestions that she turn her hobby into a business, and offers to help with logistics. He said I needed a business account and software to track commissions, she said. That's when he sent the file. Owen joined us remotely over video call, walking us through the analysis he'd completed. The file Emily downloaded wasn't software, he explained. It was a remote access Trojan, a rat. It gave the attacker control over her computer. They could see her screen, log her keystrokes, and access stored passwords. From there, they got into Ruth's accounts, email, banking, even the digital copies of her property documents. I watched Mom's face tighten as the pieces fell into place. So when I sent those documents to Emily last spring, she began, and Owen nodded. That's when they got them. The rat transmitted copies automatically. It wasn't Emily's fault. The relief in her expression was painful to watch. She had blamed herself for too long. Nora took careful notes as Owen described the digital fingerprints linking the intrusion back to the same network we'd traced from the hidden cameras. That's your intent and your method, she said finally. The prosecutor will love this. It proves they weren't just opportunists. They planned, infiltrated, and executed. She closed her notebook. We can't stop the system from trusting bad paperwork, but we can make a case strong enough to break their protection. Mom reached across the table and placed her hand over Emily's. You were trying to help, she said softly. That's what they count on, but that's also what's going to save us now. You're giving us proof. For a brief moment, the tension in the room eased. It was fragile, but it felt like progress, the first step in turning fear into strategy. By evening, the evidence packet was ready. Nora took it to deliver personally to the prosecutor. She left with her usual calm determination, but I could tell from the set of her shoulders that she understood the stakes. Once she was gone, I locked every door, checked every window, and walked the perimeter twice. The house felt heavier in the dark, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Mom and Emily were asleep upstairs. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea that had gone cold, listening to the rain tapping the windows. That's when I heard it, a faint cough, too soft to belong to either of them. It came from outside near the back patio, The kind of sound a person makes when they're trying not to make a sound. I stood slowly, heart pounding, and reached for the light switch. The floodlight flared on blinding for a second before my eyes adjusted. The yard was empty, but the soil beneath the living room window told another story. Fresh boot prints pressed deep into the damp earth leading up to the glass. Someone had been standing there watching the house, and they'd been close enough to see me sitting at the table. For a long moment, I just stood there staring at the prints in the dirt. The floodlight glared against the wet ground, and each boot mark was distinct enough to see the tread pattern. Whoever had been out there hadn't tried to hide their tracks. The prints came from the back fence, stopped at the living room window, then turned back the same way. They hadn't lingered long. Just enough time to check something to make sure we were still here, still playing our part in their game. My pulse slowed after a few deep breaths. Panic wouldn't help. What would help was evidence. I grabbed my phone, crouched down, and started photographing the prints, placing a ruler from the tool drawer next to them for scale. The cold air burned my lungs as I exhaled. Each photo felt like one small act of control against something that had taken too much already. When I was done, I called Nora. She answered on the first ring, her voice low and alert, the tone of someone who'd learned that nighttime calls were never good. "Stay inside," she said immediately. "Lock the doors. Don't touch anything." Within 20 minutes, a patrol car rolled up quietly, headlights off, followed by a crime scene tech in a dark jacket. They worked efficiently, photographing the same prints I had and making plaster casts. The tech looked up at me once and said, "Work boots, size 10, maybe 11. Common tread sold everywhere." Could be anyone. His tone wasn't dismissive, just factual, and that somehow made it worse. It meant the threat wasn't a stranger in a mask. It was someone ordinary, someone who could walk into a hardware store on any street in America and buy the same shoes. Nora's voice on the phone was steady as she listened to the update. "This confirms they're watching," she said. "We've gone from digital surveillance to physical trespass. I'll have a patrol circle the block tonight." The commotion woke Mom. She came down the stairs in her robe, one hand gripping the banister, her face pale but steady. "What's happened now?" she asked, looking past me toward the window. When she saw the officers outside, she seemed to shrink for a moment before straightening again. "They were here, weren't they?" I nodded. "Probably just watching, checking if the cameras were gone." Her lips tightened. 40 years in this house, Hannah. Your father and I built this porch by hand. Now I feel like I can't even stand by the window." Her voice cracked, but there was more anger than fear in it. I trusted that man. I let him into my home. I made him coffee. I set a hand on her shoulder. "You trusted because you're decent. That's not a weakness." She took a deep breath, then looked around the living room. "What do we do now?" That question, the same one she'd asked the day Dad died, was always her way of taking back control. It meant she was ready to act, not just react. I told her we'd do what we'd always done, fix what was broken one piece at a time. We started with the lights. By sunrise, Owen had come back with extra equipment, and we installed motion sensor floodlights on every side of the house. Simple things, no network connections, no apps, just good old wiring and bulbs. I found a set of window alarms at the hardware store, the kind that chimed loudly if opened. Mom understood how those worked, and that was the point. Familiar tools for an unfamiliar threat. When everything was done, she stood on the porch watching the morning light spill across the yard. "It's strange," she said quietly. "I thought adding all these locks and lights would make me feel trapped. But it doesn't. It feels solid." She turned to me with a faint smile. "Maybe that's what safety is, something you can see working." For the first time in weeks, I saw the woman I'd grown up with, the one who could fix a leaky pipe or negotiate a bill collector without breaking a sweat. We decided I would stay with her until the restraining order was finalized, and she didn't argue. That night, as we tested the chimes and checked the doors, she was calmer. Her fear had shape now, and shape could be managed. Emily showed up just after dinner, looking both nervous and determined. She'd been quiet all day, but now her eyes had that same focus I'd seen when she painted intent deliberate. "I've been thinking," she said. "If we wait for them to make the next move, we'll always be behind. But what if I make the move instead?" Before I could stop her, she held up her phone. On the screen was a text thread with her so-called mentor. She'd written him a message earlier that afternoon, pretending nothing had changed. "Hey, sorry I disappeared. I've been busy with art shows. Still want to learn more about business stuff. Think we could meet soon?" I felt my stomach knot. That's dangerous." She shook her head. "I'm not telling him anything. I'm just keeping him talking. If he thinks I'm still useful, he'll stay in contact." Her plan was simple but clever. She would act as though she was still unaware of the investigation, still the naive artist hungry for guidance. "He doesn't know we've connected the dots," she said. "If he bites, maybe we can draw him out." She refreshed the screen while we waited. A new message popped up after only a few minutes. The mentor was eager, too eager. "Glad to hear from you. I've got a space downtown, a co-working office. We can go over some ideas there next week. How's Tuesday?" Emily looked at me, the glow from her phone lighting her face. "I'll forward the address to you and Nora. Maybe she can have someone check it out." It was risky, but it was a lead, something concrete for the first time in days. I could see the guilt still shadowing her expression, the need to make this right. "We'll do this smart," I said. "No meetings alone, no surprises. You're not bait. You're our link." She nodded, biting her lip. "I know. But if he thinks I'm pulling away, he might ghost. I have to sound real." Her voice trembled, but her resolve didn't. She set the phone down for a moment, rubbing her hands together. "Do you think he'll fall for it?" I started to answer, but the screen lit up again before I could. The notification banner flashed at the top, one new message. Emily's face drained of color as she read it. She turned the screen toward me. The words were short, casual, but they sent a cold wave through the room. "If your sister's still asking questions, maybe you should come alone. Safety first." When Emily showed me the message from her so-called mentor, my stomach tightened in that way it does when instinct outruns thought. Maybe you should come alone. It wasn't just controlling, it was a test. He wanted to see if she'd follow orders if he still had power. Nora agreed it was bait, but we could use it. If he gave her a location, there's something to find there, she said. That's how 2 days later I found myself standing with Mara in the lobby of a co-working building downtown, a glass and chrome monument to modern anonymity. The place looked professional enough. A digital directory scrolled through dozens of company names, most of them ones I'd never heard before. It was the kind of place where people rented respectability by the hour. The receptionist, a young man in a crisp shirt with earbuds half hidden under his hair, greeted us with polite detachment. I told him I was following up on a package for AD Foundation Holdings. His eyes flicked toward the computer screen, then back to me. "Mail forwarding only," he said. "They don't keep a suite here, just a box number." He hesitated, glancing over my shoulder as if expecting someone else. "Actually, there are at least 6 different companies that all use variations of that address. Non-profits, consulting firms, real estate agencies. They get mail, but nobody ever comes in to work." He gave a small shrug, the kind that meant he'd seen too much to care. "Perfectly legal, though. Half our clients are remote now." It was brilliant, really fraud hidden inside the shell of normal business practice. The legitimacy of the system protected them. We waited in the lobby until Nora arrived with a signed request from the building's management office to access surveillance footage. The manager, a brisk woman in a navy blazer, led us to a small back room lined with monitors. She scrolled through the past month's feed, her finger tapping the mouse in steady rhythm. "Here," she said, finally pausing the playback. The grainy video showed Jason entering the lobby 2 weeks ago, carrying the same leather portfolio he'd brought to the notary. He went straight to the mail locker, typed a code, and pulled out a small padded envelope. Next to him was a woman in a beige coat, her head tilted just enough that the camera caught only her hairline. "She came with him twice," the manager said. "Always the same time, always gone within 10 minutes. Every package for AD Foundation Holdings, she explained, was automatically redirected to a P.O. box in another county. Mail forwarding keeps everything moving. Nothing stays long enough to flag attention. While Nora made notes, I stepped back into the lobby, needing air. The place had the sterile quiet of spaces built for transients, clean desks, fake plants, not a trace of personality. That's when I noticed the evening cleaning crew rolling their carts toward the elevators. 2 women mid-50s, maybe chatting softly in Spanish. One smiled at me as she passed, and something about her expression, the unguarded honesty of it, made me speak. I asked if she'd seen the man in the video describing Jason's height and the way he dressed. Her eyes lit with recognition. "Oh, the Saturday businessman," she said. Her accent was light, her tone friendly. "He comes when nobody's here, always around 6. Parked downstairs in the garage. I thought maybe he rents a room, but he never goes inside. Just meets someone by the elevator, sometimes gives her an envelope, then leaves. Quick business." Nora's ears practically perked up when I repeated it to her. "He's not using the office at all," she said. "He's using the address as a prop." The janitor's casual observation gave us what hours of camera footage hadn't a pattern. Real people saw what machines missed. Nora jotted it down, her pen pressing so hard the paper almost tore. "We'll set up a quiet watch this Saturday. No uniforms, no sirens, just eyes." By the weekend, the plan was simple. Mara and I would station ourselves at the coffee shop across from the garage entrance, while Nora's team waited 2 blocks away with an unmarked car. I tried not to think about how surreal it felt staking out a fraud ring from behind a window display of croissants and tulips, but the absurdity helped keep my nerves steady. The late afternoon light filtered through the glass, turning the street into a mirror of reflections. I stirred my coffee without drinking it, watching the garage entrance through the gap between 2 potted plants. Mara was beside me with her notebook open, pretending to sketch, but really keeping time. "You ever think," she said quietly, "that the world got too complicated for honesty?" I almost smiled. "No," I said. "I think honesty just got better at hiding." At 6:07, a beige sedan pulled into the curb lane and my pulse jumped. A woman stepped out, locking the car with a chirp. She wore a beige trench coat belted at the waist, her hair tied in a low knot. From this distance, she could have been anyone, the picture of forgettable professionalism. She walked briskly to the lobby, tapped a code on the wall-mounted locker system, and withdrew a single envelope. She paused to check her phone, standing just long enough for the evening light to catch her face. That's when I froze. The shape of her jaw, the way she held her shoulders, it pulled at something half buried in memory. Then she turned slightly, and the years peeled back. "Darla Finch," I whispered. Mara looked up. "Who I used to work with her," I said, my voice low. "At Markham and Sloan back when I was interning. She was a legal secretary, handled closings and notarizations. She knew every real estate loophole in the book." My thoughts raced. Darla had been sharp, organized, and meticulous, the kind of person who color-coded her sticky notes and never missed a deadline. She'd also been ambitious, always talking about how underpaid legal support staff were compared to the lawyers they saved from mistakes. I remembered her saying once, half joking, that she could make more money on her own if she stopped caring about ethics. At the time, I'd laughed. Now, watching her across the street, it didn't feel like a joke anymore. She was the missing link, the one who could make the paperwork seamless, who knew exactly how to falsify notarizations without setting off alarms. Jason and Avery might have orchestrated the scheme, but Darla had built the bridge that made it possible. She tucked the envelope into her bag and looked around, scanning the street like someone accustomed to checking her surroundings. My heart thudded. Mara followed my gaze. "You're sure it's her?" I nodded. "Absolutely." Just then, Darla lifted her phone to her ear. She said something we couldn't hear, then paused mid-step. Her head turned slowly toward our side of the street, and her eyes swept across the windows of the coffee shop. For one brief electric second, her gaze locked on mine. She wasn't guessing. She knew. Her expression didn't change. No surprise, no fear, just a faint knowing smile, as if she'd been expecting us all along. Then she slipped her phone back into her pocket, got into her car, and drove away. I sat there gripping my cup so tightly the cardboard bent the last echo of her stare burning in my chest. Mara exhaled beside me. She saw us, she said. She more than saw us, I replied. She recognized me. I couldn't stop thinking about that look Darla had given me, the calm, measured glance of someone who had already calculated the odds. Most people caught doing something wrong panic. Darla hadn't. That made me more certain she knew exactly what she was involved in. But I also remembered the woman she used to be, the one who stayed late at the law office to fix other people's mistakes, who cared too much about getting details right. That was the Darla I needed to reach. The next morning, I parked outside the co-working building and waited. She showed up right on time, pulling into the same space near the entrance, beige coat, buttoned-up hair immaculate. I stepped out of my car and walked toward her before I could lose my nerve. "Darla," I called softly. She turned startled keys, half raised like a reflex. When she saw me, her face went through 3 emotions in a heartbeat: recognition, confusion, then something close to fear. "It's Hannah," I said, keeping my tone gentle. "Hannah Beck. We worked together at Morrison & Associates, remember?" Her expression flickered memory, finding its footing. "Hannah," she said slowly, "what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same," I said, though I tried to make it sound like concern rather than accusation. She glanced around, scanning the lot. "I'm busy. I can't talk." She started toward her car, but I stepped beside her. "Please, Darla, I'm not here to threaten you. I just need to understand what's happening to my mother." That stopped her. The word mother hung between us, heavier than anything else I could have said. After a long pause, she exhaled sharply. "Fine. 5 minutes. In the car." Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and cheap perfume. She gripped the steering wheel even though we weren't going anywhere. "You don't know what you're asking," she said. I met her eyes. "Then tell me." "I think you're caught in something that's hurting people you don't even realize." Her shoulders slumped. "I'm not one of them, Hannah. She stopped, shaking her head. "I've been doing freelance notary work the past couple of years. After I lost my job, this guy, he called himself a legal consultant, reached out. Said he needed a mobile notary for document signings, real estate stuff. They sent everything ready to go. Identification copies, forms, the signatures already in place. I just had to verify, apply my seal, and mail them back. It all looked legitimate. The pay was good, always on time. I didn't ask questions because I didn't want to see what might be wrong." Her voice was defensive at first, then smaller. "They said they worked with a nonprofit, AD Foundation Holdings. I thought it was some housing program for seniors." I felt a chill crawl through me. "That's the group behind the scam," I said. "They've been stealing homes. My mother's one of the targets." Darla went pale. "Oh, God." She pressed her fingers to her mouth. No, that can't I just notarize. I don't handle the transfers." But the veneer cracked fast. I saw the guilt rising. "You had doubts," I said quietly. "When did you start realizing something wasn't right?" She looked away toward the dashboard. "About 6 months ago," she said. "Some of the IDs looked off. Too perfect, like they'd been printed from the same template. And the signatures, they were identical. At first I told myself maybe these were clients with poor handwriting. But I knew better. The documents were too clean. Real paperwork always has smudges, stray pen marks, coffee stains. These looked manufactured." She laughed bitterly. "My ex left me with debt and I was behind on everything: rent, car payments, insurance. I convinced myself I was just verifying, not falsifying. I didn't want to know the rest." She looked up then, eyes glassy. "You said your mother's involved. How did she sign something?" I shook my head. "No. They forged her deed. That broke her." Her face crumpled and tears started silently. "I never saw the victims," she whispered. "Just names and paper. I didn't think it was real people. I told myself I was helping streamline the process. But now, my seal." They used my seal to steal homes. She covered her face with both hands, sobbing quietly. I gave her a moment. Then I said, "You can help fix this." That got her attention. I called Nora on speaker, explaining where I was and that Darla was willing to talk. Nora's voice was steady but firm. "Darla, I'm Detective Nora Patel with the County Financial Crimes Unit. I appreciate your cooperation, but I have to be clear, you're looking at serious charges." Darla wiped her eyes, swallowing hard. "How serious?" "Conspiracy to commit fraud, official misconduct, misuse of notary authority," Nora said. "Depending on the judge, that's 3 to 5 years in prison and permanent loss of your license." Darla's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Nora paused, letting that sink in. However, she continued, "If you work with us, provide documentation, testify, and help us intercept their next move. The prosecutor will consider a plea deal. Reduced charges. Probation instead of prison." Darla stared at the phone like she was weighing every bad decision she'd ever made. "You really think it'll matter?" she asked softly. "If I help," Nora didn't hesitate. "Yes, it will help stop them." That seemed to steady her. "Then I'll do it," she said. "Whatever it takes." Nora asked her to forward all communications with her contact. Darla opened her messages and froze. "You won't believe this," she said. On the screen was a new text from the same number that had sent her jobs before. The subject line read, "Priority Package. Ruth Beck." My chest went cold. Darla scrolled further. Instructions. "Prepare for mobile notary visit. Verify signatures in-person. Return packet by end of week." Her voice shook. "They want me to notarize your mother's deed." Nora's tone sharpened. "That's our window. Darla, you'll accept the assignment exactly as usual. We'll control the environment and capture everything: delivery communication, payment, trail. This is the proof we need." Darla nodded slowly, determination flickering through her fear. "If we're doing this," she said, looking at me, "I need an exit plan. Once they realize I'm cooperating, they'll come after me." Her phone buzzed again, vibrating against the console. The message preview glowed like a warning: appointment confirmed. Tomorrow night. She turned to me, eyes wide. "They want the deed notarized tomorrow night. If we're doing this, we need an exit plan for me." When Darla said the notarization was set for the next night, I could almost feel the air leave the room. She was shaking, trying to stay composed, but the weight of what she was about to do was written all over her face. Nora didn't waste a second. Within an hour, she had Owen on speaker, and the two of them were designing what she called a reverse con, a sting built on precision, not confrontation. "We're not catching Jason in the act," Nora explained. "We're catching the pipeline. We need to see who handles the paperwork after him." Owen's voice was calm, methodical. "Then we'll make sure they handle the wrong paperwork." The next morning, Owen showed up at my place carrying a hard drive and a coffee the size of his head. He spread out the decoy documents across my kitchen table, each page a flawless replica of the fraudulent deed filed in Mom's name. "These look exactly like the real ones," he said. "But they're not ordinary files. I embedded a digital beacon in the PDF metadata. Every time the file is opened, it pings a location signal to my server. It's subtle enough that even advanced antivirus won't flag it." He flipped open a small case and pulled out a USB drive. "And this," he added, "is the real hook. It looks like it contains backup forms, but it's actually a monitoring device. When plugged in, it logs the IP address, operating system, and device ID. Totally legal. Ruth owns the content, so she's authorizing us to track it." Darla sat quietly watching him work. She'd been through her own storm of fear that day, torn between guilt and resolve. "So I just act normal," she said finally. "I meet Jason, tell him the package is ready for filing, and hand it off." Owen nodded. "Exactly. You're the courier. No deviation from your usual behavior. The point isn't to catch him, it's to follow him," Nora added from across the table. "Once the trail leads somewhere official, we'll have the evidence to expose the insider. That's how they're making it stick. Someone inside is processing these deeds. Darla's lips pressed into a thin line. I can do this, she said quietly. But after you make sure I disappear from their radar. The next evening, the air was heavy with humidity, the kind that made the world feel smaller. Darla's meeting was set for 8 p.m. in the parking lot of St. Mary's Church, a place neutral enough to seem ordinary. Nora's team was already in place, 2 unmarked cars in adjacent lots, one across the street with Owen monitoring the data feed from his laptop. Mara and I waited in Nora's vehicle, hearts beating in sync with the quiet hiss of the police radio. From our vantage point, we could see Darla standing by her car, envelope in hand, every inch of her body radiating tension. When Jason arrived, he did it with the casual arrogance of someone who believed the world was already rigged in his favor. He greeted her with that familiar salesman's smile, took the envelope, and chatted briefly before walking back to his car. No dramatics, no raised voices, just business as usual. That was the beauty and horror of it, how mundane the theft of a home could look. Owen's voice crackled through the comms, beacon activated. The first ping appeared on his screen within seconds. Location 1, church Wi-Fi. That's Jason verifying the contents. We waited, tension coiled tight. Second ping, senior living center half a mile away. Maybe he's using their public network. Third ping, moving. He's on the road. VPN routing started. Owen's fingers flew across the keyboard as the trail jumped state lines. He's bouncing the signal Virginia, Colorado, Oregon classic misdirection. Then he froze. Oh my God, it's terminating at the county recorder's office. Nora's eyes narrowed. Repeat that. The final access point, the beacon's responding from inside the recorder's office network. Someone with system credentials just opened the file. The realization hit all of us at once. The fraud wasn't happening in the shadows, it was being sanctioned from within. Someone who had the power to process property titles legally was rubber-stamping the stolen deeds. Nora was already on her phone. Get me a warrant for digital access logs, she said. We're done chasing ghosts, time to drag them into daylight. By the following morning, the subpoena had been served. The county IT department cooperated reluctantly, but they had no choice once the federal task force got involved. The beacon logs provided exact timestamps, 9:47 p.m. access from a workstation registered to the Property Records Division. 3 employees had been logged in during that window, 2 senior staffers and 1 intern. Nora requested interviews with all 3. The first 2 were defensive, annoyed at being questioned. The intern Marcus looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was barely 20, nervous to the point of shaking. We sat in one of the conference rooms, the blinds drawn. Nora's tone was calm, patient. Marcus, we're not here to ruin your life. We're here to stop a crime that's hurting people. Help us understand what happened. He stared down at his hands, twisting a cheap college ring around his finger. I didn't think it was a big deal, he said finally. It wasn't like I changed any records. I just moved some files up in the queue, processed them faster. I figured that's all they wanted. Gas money, that's what she called it. A little thank you for helping things run smoother. Nora leaned forward. Who's she? Marcus swallowed hard. I don't know her name. She'd leave envelopes in the break room, $200 at a time. Always cash. Sometimes she'd call from a blocked number to say which file needed to go through first. Said it was for a non-profit project that the board was impatient. His voice wavered. She smelled like peppermint. Always wore these silver bracelets that jingled when she handed me the papers. Mara and I exchanged a glance. Peppermint and silver. I didn't have to say it aloud. Nora saw it in my expression. Avery Dawson. Marcus hesitated before adding in a near whisper. She said if I ever told anyone, she'd make sure I lost my scholarship. She knew where I went to school and everything. Nora replayed Marcus's words over and over again in the car on the way back to headquarters, her fingers drumming on the steering wheel. Peppermint, silver bracelets, female, comfortable in official spaces, the kind of woman who could walk into a county building with confidence and leave without a second glance. It wasn't much, but for Nora it was enough to start building a profile. She requested access to internal security footage from the recorder's office, zeroing in on the dates Marcus mentioned for the cash drops. Late nights after hours when the cleaning staff were around but the supervisors were long gone. The footage was grainy gray-blue from the flicker of fluorescent lights. And then there she was, a woman in a fitted blazer and long sleeves walking briskly down the corridor, sunglasses perched absurdly on her face even under artificial light. She dropped an envelope on the break room counter, adjusted her cuff, and left without hesitation. The silver bracelets flashed just once in the frame, catching the camera's reflection. Nora paused the footage. "There," she said. "That's our peppermint ghost." I leaned closer to the monitor. The jewelry was distinctive, not the jangly bangles you'd find at a department store, but two ornate cuffs engraved with what looked like small ivy leaves. "Zoom in," I said. The image pixelated, but the design was still visible. Mara, who had joined us, stared hard at the screen, and then her face changed. "Wait," she murmured. "I've seen those before." She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through old photos she'd archived from her research. After a minute, she found a newspaper clipping from 2019, an article about a charity gala hosted by the AD Foundation. Avery Dawson stood beside the mayor, smiling gracefully. Her wrists were bare except for those same silver cuffs. Mara held the phone next to the paused footage, and even in low resolution, the match was perfect. "That's her," I said quietly. "Avery Dawson. She's the inside operator." Nora nodded grimly. "It fits. She coordinates with Jason in the field, gathers the signed or forged paperwork, and passes it through to a corrupted insider. She's the bridge between con and courthouse." It was horrifyingly elegant, every piece of the puzzle designed to look harmless on its own, the whole system feeding itself under the guise of legitimacy. Nora sat back thinking, "We can't arrest her yet, not without catching her in the act. If she's this careful, she'll claim coincidence or impersonation. We need her touching evidence with her own hands." That's when Nora suggested surveillance. "She and Jason have been seen together at church," she said. "It's neutral ground. Public. If they're maintaining their cover, they'll appear there again." I didn't like the idea of using a sanctuary as a stage for evidence gathering, but I understood the logic. It was the one place both of them could show their faces without arousing suspicion. Nora hesitated before looking at me. "I don't think your mother should go," she said gently. "It could be triggering." I met her gaze. "She wants to see this through. She's stronger than you think." When I told Mom the plan, she was silent for a long moment, staring out the window toward the garden Dad had planted years ago. Finally, she said, "If that woman thinks she can stand in God's house and pretend kindness, then I want to see it. I want to look her in the eye and know what kind of person does this." Her tone was steady, not vengeful, just clear. So on Sunday morning we went together. The church was the same one she'd attended for decades, all polished wood and soft light filtering through stained glass. The smell of candle wax and hymn books carried me back to childhood, when this place had felt like the safest corner of the world. We sat near the back Mara, a few pews ahead, with a small lapel mic feeding to Nora's earpiece in the car outside. The service began quietly, hymns, announcements, the hum of old voices blending in familiar harmony. For a moment, I almost forgot why we were there. Then I saw him. Jason walked in dressed in a navy suit that made him look respectable, almost boyish. He scanned the room as though he belonged there, as though he hadn't spent months dismantling the lives of widows and retirees. His eyes caught Ruth's, and instead of avoidance, he smiled. "Ruth," he said warmly, walking up the aisle during a hymn. "It's good to see you. I heard about all that confusion with your accounts. You doing all right?" The audacity of it stole my breath. He sounded like a neighbor checking in after a storm. Ruth's lips parted, but no sound came. Before she could answer, another figure approached, a silver-haired woman in a cream dress and pearls, moving with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to admiration. Avery Dawson. She looked exactly like her photographs, elegant, controlled, every gesture deliberate. The silver cuffs at her wrists glimmered softly under the church lights. My dear Avery said, placing a hand on Mom's shoulder. We've all been so worried about you. I told everyone at the circle you were just overwhelmed. These things happen. Her voice was syrupy sweet, every word designed to soothe and manipulate. Ruth stiffened beneath her touch. I didn't ask for your concern, she said quietly. But Avery just smiled. Oh, Ruth, we all care about you. We just want what's best. Her bracelets jingled faintly as she reached to pat Ruth's hand. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. Nora's voice came softly through the earpiece I wore. Stay calm, Hannah. Don't engage. But something in Avery's expression made that almost impossible. She was performing kindness like a role she'd rehearsed for years. When she finally turned her gaze on me, I saw it recognition followed by amusement. Her lips curved, but her eyes stayed cold. And then, without sound, she mouthed the words slowly and deliberately, so there could be no mistake. See you soon, Hannah. I didn't sleep that night after church. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Avery's face composed elegant and utterly fearless. The way she said my name without sound as though she were blessing me and warning me in the same breath left a cold echo in my chest. Mom sat up late, too quietly knitting at the kitchen table like she used to when Dad worked night shifts. Neither of us said much. There wasn't anything to say that could make sense of what we'd just witnessed, a thief standing in a sanctuary pretending to care. The next morning, Nora called us into the station. She looked sharper than usual, a kind of focused exhaustion around her eyes that I'd learned meant progress. We ran Avery Dawson's photo through every database we have, she said, gesturing toward the monitor. On the screen was Avery's driver's license photo, same face, same polished smile. But beneath it, a different name appeared, Avery Dennings. That's her maiden name, Nora said. She lost her real estate broker license in 2013, the official reason notarizing documents without the signers present. In plain language, she forged paperwork. Mara frowned. So she's been doing this for over a decade? Nora nodded. Looks that way. After her license was revoked, she disappeared from public records for almost 3 years. Then she reemerged under the married name Dawson. Short marriage ended in 2015, but she kept the name. It's legal and frankly clever. It erased her professional record just enough that she could reinvent herself. She clicked to another file showing property filings, nonprofit registrations, and tax records under the new name. She used that second life to build something bigger. AD Foundation Community Care Circle. Even a small trust in her own name. It's all connected. I leaned closer to the screen. She turned her punishment into training, I said quietly. She learned how the system fails, then built her business around exploiting those weaknesses. Nora didn't disagree. She's not impulsive, she said. She plans in layers. Even now, she's insulated. Jason handles victims, she handles legitimacy. She uses respectability as a weapon. Later that afternoon, we met with Nora's analyst to review witness statements and footage. On one monitor, they played clips from church events, fundraisers, and book club meetings. Avery appeared in nearly all of them, not at the center, but always near someone grieving, always listening. The analyst narrated as the footage rolled. Notice how she positions herself, he said. She doesn't approach directly. She orbits first, establishes familiarity. When the victim speaks about loss, Avery mirrors body language, head tilt, soft tone. Then she validates, usually with a personal anecdote about her own widowhood, which we now know is fabricated. Mara added, "She doesn't sell anything. She suggests." The analyst nodded. "Exactly. She never mentions money or property. She frames everything as concern. You should think about protecting your home from scammers." She gives advice that sounds protective, not predatory. By the time she introduces Jason, the target already trusts her completely. Watching the footage made my skin crawl. The rhythm of her manipulation was subtle, almost graceful. She built a social web so quietly that her victims felt lucky to be caught in it. Mom sat beside me, her expression unreadable. Finally, she said, "You know what the worst part is?" She used kindness like a mask. "People like me, we grew up believing that church friends were safe, that helping hands were genuine. She's the reason people stopped trusting good ones." Nora turned off the screen. "That's why we need to handle this carefully," she said. "If we go after her too soon, she'll vanish. And if we botch the arrest, every other part of her network will scatter. We need her caught with the evidence in hand, an active transaction, digital trace, or physical delivery tying her to the fraud." I understood her logic, but patience felt like poison. "She's still out there," I said, "still walking around smiling at people she's already decided to destroy." Nora met my eyes. "I know. But if we move now, we might win the argument and lose the case. We've got conspiracy, identity theft, money laundering, and elder abuse ready to go, but the prosecutor wants ironclad proof of execution. One last link." She glanced at the wall where our evidence board had grown like ivy photographs, documents, maps connected by red string. Every piece of it pointed back to Avery. I could almost feel her mocking us from behind her elegant disguise. After Nora left for a meeting, I stayed behind with Mara, who was quietly reviewing Darla's statements. "Do you ever wonder?" she asked softly, "what Avery tells herself to make it okay? Does she think she's helping, or does she just not care?" I thought about the way Avery's hand had rested on Mom's shoulder, the warmth in her voice, the eyes that had felt colder than glass. "I think she believes she deserves it," I said finally, "that the world owes her for every time someone underestimated her. And she learned that being helpful is the best way to hide harm." As evening settled, the station lights dimmed to half-power, casting long shadows across the desks. Nora came back holding her phone, her expression sharpened into purpose. "That was the prosecutor," she said, dropping into her chair. "We've got enough to move on Jason. Search warrant approved devices, communications, everything." Relief mixed with adrenaline in my chest. This was the first real crack in the armor, the beginning of turning evidence into action. Nora stood already gathering files into a binder. "Prepare the evidence," she said, her voice clipped but steady. "We're going after his computers, his phones, his drives. Once we have them, we'll trace every message between him and Avery. If she left a fingerprint anywhere, we'll find it." She paused at the doorway and looked back at me. "This is it, Hannah. The house of cards is about to fall." Then her phone buzzed again, and she lifted it to her ear. A brief silence, then her tone hardened. "Understood." She turned back to us. "The prosecutor says we've got enough for a search warrant on Jason's devices. Prepare the evidence binder." The morning after the warrant approval felt different, calm, but charged like the air before a storm. Nora called it the paper phase, the part of every investigation where emotion had to give way to precision. By noon, our dining table had turned into a legal war room. Stacks of printouts surrounded us, property records, screenshots, text logs, and sworn statements. Mara brought takeout coffee and sandwiches that went untouched as we worked. Owen sat in front of his laptop muttering about metadata and timestamps, while Nora dictated notes for the summary section that would tie everything together. "The judge will be older," she said. "Maybe someone who still writes checks. We can't drown them in jargon. The story has to read cleanly: crime evidence, accountability." We built the binder piece by piece, page by page, a physical map of the deceit we'd been unraveling for weeks. First came the surveillance photos from the church, printed in sequence with simple captions explaining context. Next, Owen's beacon tracking report, color-coded maps tracing the movement of the fraudulent documents from Jason's laptop to the county office. He rewrote his technical explanations 3 times until even Mom could follow them. This Software 1 annotation read recorded every keystroke Mrs. Beck typed on her computer, including passwords and bank account information. There were no acronyms, no flashy graphs, just clarity and proof. Marcus's sworn statement followed, printed on official letterhead, his handwriting steady, but the words trembling with guilt. Darla's cooperation agreement came next, outlining her assistance and verified communications. Emily's forensic report filled the next section, a meticulous chain of evidence showing how the spyware infected her laptop, then spread through synced cloud folders into Mom's financial accounts. Owen included a side-by-side timeline chart showing 8 victims their first contact with Jason, the property transfers, and the matching deposits into AD Foundation accounts. Every line connected back to Avery. By the time we added Ruth's affidavit denying any property transfer authorization, the binder stood nearly 3 inches thick. Heavy, literal weight to counter years of invisible theft. We finished close to midnight. Nora flipped through it one last time, checking the order and tone. "This isn't just for court," she said quietly. "It's for the record, so the story can't be rewritten by people like Avery." I understood. Fraud lives in the shadows of complexity. Our job was to shine light through simplicity. The next morning, the warrant came through. The timing was deliberate, 6 a.m., when Jason would still be home and unguarded. Nora led the operation with practiced calm. Mom and I waited at the station while the team executed the warrant, the minutes crawling by. At 7:12, Nora texted one word: secured. When we arrived, Jason was already in an interview room looking strangely composed, like a man who'd been expecting this day. Through the glass, he appeared almost curious, his hands folded neatly on the table. He didn't resist, Nora said. Didn't even ask for a lawyer. That's confidence or arrogance. She handed me a sealed evidence bag containing his phone and laptop. Digital forensics is imaging them now. We'll see what he's been hiding. By noon, Owen had what he needed. Got something, he said, eyes wide. He projected Jason's files onto the screen in the lab. The first document was titled Elder Conversation Guide. Inside were scripted talking points, questions to ask widows about their families, assets, and emotional vulnerabilities. Identify triggers. One bullet read, encourage discussion about simplifying finances. Another, establish mutual trust through faith-based language. It wasn't just manipulation. It was a manual. Next came a spreadsheet listing dozens of names, addresses, property values, and family notes. Mom's name was on it. So was Mara's mother's. Each had a column labeled AD Review. Then came the most damning find of all, a thread of text messages between Jason and a contact saved as AD. The tone was professional but revealing. AD target secured. Proceed with notary by Friday. Jason Darla confirmed. Funds to be routed to Holding 3. AD ensure church presence maintained. Optics matter. Every detail pointed straight to Avery Dawson. For the first time, her carefully cultivated facade was documented in her own digital fingerprints. That evening, I drove home exhausted, but hopeful. It felt like progress, measurable, tangible progress. But hope never lasts long in this story. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. The message contained a single photo and a short line of text. You might want to tell your sister to keep her hands clean. The image was an old tax assistance form. Emily's handwriting, unmistakable, her name beside our father's. It was from 5 years ago, a volunteer filing she'd done for him when his health started failing. The signature page was incomplete, technically a procedural error, not a crime, but I knew exactly how someone like Avery could twist it. The implication was clear: back off, or they'd make Emily look like a fraud. My first instinct was anger, not fear. They were trying to scare us the way they'd scared everyone else, through shame, not truth. I called Nora immediately, forwarded the message, and told her everything. She didn't even hesitate. Good. Get ahead of it. We drove straight to the station, Emily in tow, and filed a formal statement explaining the document and the circumstances. If they want to use this, Emily said, her voice steady, then they can do it in court where people actually check facts. By going public, we stripped the threat of its power. Nora even thanked Emily afterward. They just made a mistake, she said. They showed us they're still watching, which means they're nervous. It felt like we'd finally taken back control until the next knock at the door. It was just past sunset when Mom opened it. A man in a suit stood on the porch holding a thick envelope and a clipboard. "Are you Mrs. Ruth Beck?" he asked. She nodded. "You've been served." He handed her the papers and walked away without another word. The header was printed in bold, all-caps letters that made my stomach drop. AD Foundation Holdings versus Ruth Beck, wrongful property transfer claim. They weren't just defending themselves now. They were going on the attack. When I read the first line of the lawsuit, I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because the audacity was almost too much to process. AD Foundation Holdings. Avery's front company was suing my mother for breach of contract and defamation. According to their complaint, Ruth had voluntarily agreed to sell her property and was now falsely accusing the foundation of fraudulent behavior to evade contractual obligations. They attached the forged quitclaim deed as proof of the sale, complete with Darla's old notary seal and Jason's fake witness signature. I'd seen some bold tactics before, but this was a new level of shameless. They weren't just defending themselves, they were attacking, betting that fear and exhaustion would do what deception hadn't. The demand was outrageous. Either Mom completed the transfer or paid $200,000 in damages for tortious interference with business relations. Nora flipped through the pages with the grim calm of someone who'd predicted this. "It's a slap suit," she said. "Strategic lawsuit against public participation. They're trying to drain time, money, and morale. It's not about winning, it's about exhausting you until you give up." I felt my hands tremble as I took the papers back from her. "They're using the same system that's supposed to protect people like her," I said. "That's what makes it work," Nora replied. "They're counting on the court backlog, the paperwork, the confusion. But this kind of counterpunch only happens when a scam starts to unravel. They're desperate. Still desperate people can do plenty of damage before they fall." That night, I couldn't shake the image of Avery sitting somewhere, maybe sipping tea, calm and collected, while her lawyers filed these papers. She'd turned fraud into theater, every move a performance of legitimacy. But I'd learned something in the past few weeks. You beat liars not by matching their deception, but by stripping it bare with truth. The next morning, I asked Nora for a meeting with the prosecutor. I wanted everything about Emily's old tax paperwork on record. I refused to let Avery's people spin it into something ugly behind our backs. The prosecutor, a patient woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled into a neat bun, listened carefully as I explained. 5 years ago, I said my dad had early-stage dementia. Emily tried to help him with his taxes because he couldn't remember his own numbers anymore. She was only 25. She made a few procedural mistakes on a volunteer filing form, missed signatures, wrong date formats. Nothing illegal, just inexperienced. The next year, she had a professional accountant correct everything. The prosecutor nodded slowly. "You're doing the right thing by disclosing it," she said. "They can't weaponize something you've already brought forward yourself. It's irrelevant to the case, but transparency builds credibility." I asked her if Emily's credibility as a witness would be safe. "Absolutely," she said. "This case is about organized fraud, not clerical errors. Your sister's cooperation strengthens our side." Emily was waiting in the hallway afterward, anxious but determined. "So, are we clear?" she asked. "Clear," I said. "You're on the record. They can't twist it now." She exhaled deeply, the relief visible in her shoulders. "Good. I'm tired of secrets." It struck me then that our family had been dragged through every kind of exposure, financial, emotional, personal, and the only way out was total honesty. Avery's power came from manipulation, from making people afraid of what might be revealed. But once everything was laid bare, she had nothing left to threaten us with. Back at the station, Nora was already drafting an emergency motion. "We're not letting them dictate the pace," she said. "They want to tie us up in civil court while we build the criminal case, so we'll consolidate the filings. We'll request an emergency hearing to freeze both actions, the TRO on your mom's property and their slap suit." Her tone softened slightly. "The judge we're filing with is sharp, experienced. She's seen enough of these to smell a fraud before the gavel drops." 2 days later, we found ourselves in the courthouse again. The walls were lined with oak, the air faintly dusty with age and authority. The judge entered briskly, a woman in her late 60s with short gray hair and clear, penetrating eyes. She skimmed through both filings in silence, lips tightening slightly when she reached the Foundation's claims. So she said, finally, looking over her glasses, "We have an elderly homeowner who allegedly sold her house to a nonprofit that somehow failed to document any payment or exchange of value. And now this same nonprofit is suing her for damages." Her tone made it clear what she thought of that. Avery's attorney, a young man with slicked hair and too much confidence, began reciting from the complaint, but the judge cut him off mid-sentence. "Save the dramatics for trial," she said dryly. "This hearing is to determine whether there's merit to your emergency filing." She turned to Nora. "Detective Patel, you're leading the related criminal investigation." Nora confirmed, summarizing the evidence without revealing classified details. The judge listened, expression unmoved. "Very well," she said. "I'll schedule a preliminary hearing for 72 hours from now. Both parties will appear. Until then, no property transfers, no further filings, and no contact between the Foundation and Mrs. Beck." Her gavel struck once sharp as a heartbeat. Outside, the air felt colder, as though the courthouse had exhaled us into reality again. Mom leaned on my arm, quiet but steady. "Do you think she believes us?" she asked. "I think she believes facts I said, and we've got plenty of those." Nora smiled faintly. "Now that it's on the record, media will pick it up. The more people watching, the harder it is for them to hide." We walked toward the parking lot as the afternoon light faded. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that resembled control, not victory, but readiness. Avery had chosen the battlefield, but we'd chosen the terms. I looked over at Nora and said quietly, "Let them come to court. We'll be ready." The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and polished wood, the air heavy with the kind of stillness that comes before something irreversible. We'd been here before, but today felt different, final somehow. The lawsuit from AD Foundation had turned what was once private pain into a public fight, and every hallway, every echo of heels on marble carried the weight of being watched. Ruth sat beside me on the wooden bench outside the courtroom, her hands folded around her purse like it held more than her wallet, like it held her resolve. Nora stood a few feet away, conferring quietly with our attorney, while Owen flipped through a stack of exhibits, his fingers tapping a nervous rhythm against the binder's metal rings. Mom's calmness was the kind that frightened me, the silence of someone who had already decided not to flinch no matter what came. She turned to me, her eyes gentle but firm. "Don't look at them when they talk about me," she said softly. "Just look at the judge. The truth doesn't need defense from everyone, only from those who see it." I nodded, not trusting my voice to hold steady. When the bailiff called our case, we rose. Inside the courtroom was cool and bright sunlight cutting through tall windows, making the dust shimmer like slow-moving stars. AD. Foundation's legal team sat at the opposite table, 2 men and 1 woman, all expensive fabric and perfect posture. Their lead counsel, a man whose tie probably cost more than my month's salary, stood with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in his life. He began speaking before the judge had fully taken her seat. "Your Honor," he said with a smoothness that could have been poured from a bottle, "this is at its heart a family misunderstanding that has spiraled out of control. A simple matter of estate planning turned tragic by miscommunication. Mrs. Beck, a woman of sound mind, made a voluntary decision to transfer her property for philanthropic purposes. Unfortunately, her daughters, concerned but misguided, have turned this private decision into a public spectacle. The phrasing was deliberate. He didn't attack us outright. He undermined us by dressing contempt in sympathy. These are loving but overprotective children." He continued, gesturing slightly toward me, unable to accept their mother's autonomy. His tone was honeyed, but each word landed like a needle. "We urge the court to recognize this for what it is, a well-meaning family struggle, not fraud." I could feel my pulse climbing, anger rising like heat under my collar. He was making my mother sound delusional, manipulated by her own daughters. I wanted to stand, to shout, to throw the binder of evidence across the room. Nora's hand brushed mine, a silent anchor. "Let him finish," she whispered. Our attorney, Karen Hughes, waited patiently, as if cataloging each sentence into a drawer marked "to destroy later." When the opposing counsel finally sat, she rose with a quiet authority that didn't need volume. "Your Honor," she began. "If this were truly a misunderstanding, we wouldn't be standing here with a forged notarization spyware evidence and 7 other elderly women with identical stories." She moved slowly, deliberately, laying out the timeline piece by piece like a mosaic forming itself before our eyes. The plaintiff's organization, AD Foundation, claims this was voluntary philanthropy, yet no payment records exist. The deed in question was signed under a false witness and processed through a compromised county channel. This is not autonomy, it's exploitation. She paused just long enough for the weight of the words to settle. And it's not a family tragedy, it's a criminal pattern. Then Owen took the stand. I watched him straighten his tie, something he only did when he was nervous, and face the judge. "Your Honor," he said, his voice clear. "My job was to examine the devices compromised in this case. The spyware used on Mrs. Beck's computer is what's called a keylogger. Imagine someone standing behind you writing down every letter you type, your passwords, your banking information, your private thoughts. That's what this software does. It copies trust line by line." He turned to display a simple diagram on the monitor beside him, the kind that even someone without a technical background could follow. It was installed remotely through an email attachment that appeared to come from Mrs. Beck's church donation list. The foundation's attorney objected twice, once for speculative overreach, once for irrelevance, but the judge overruled both with a curt wave of her hand. When Owen finished, the courtroom had grown quiet. Even Jason, sitting at the far end of the plaintiff's table, wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Then Nora stood to summarize the investigation. She didn't dramatize it. She simply walked the judge through the chain of evidence, the notary confession, the internal whistleblower, the digital trail. "Your Honor," she said, "this is not about family dynamics. It's about a structured system of fraud, targeting widowed women under the guise of charitable guidance. It's deliberate, repeatable, and well-funded." The judge, a woman in her late 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen every kind of lie, closed the file in front of her and leaned back. The silence stretched heavy as a verdict before it was spoken. Finally, she said, "I've heard enough." She removed her glasses, folded them neatly, and looked directly at the foundation's attorney. "You call this a family dispute. I call it a pattern of predation." Her voice never rose, but every word landed like stone. "This court grants a temporary injunction. Effective immediately, all actions concerning Mrs. Beck's property sales, refinancing, or transfers are frozen pending the completion of a full forensic investigation by a court-appointed expert. Furthermore, the plaintiff organization AD Foundation Holdings is ordered to provide a complete record of all real estate transactions conducted within the last 5 years. She paused, her tone hardening. "Transparency is the only acceptable currency in my courtroom." For a second, the entire room seemed to exhale. The Foundation's attorney tried to interject, but she cut him off with a single look. "Counselor, if your clients are as legitimate as you claim, you'll have no trouble complying." Then she stood, signaling the end of the session. And that's when Ruth did something that silenced even the shuffling of papers. She rose from her seat and addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, "I don't want revenge. I want understanding. Women like me, we trust people because that's how we were raised. We think kindness is safety. But these people take our trust and use it like a key to our own doors. I want them stopped not just for me, but for every woman who thinks being kind means being blind." The judge inclined her head just slightly, the faintest acknowledgement of respect. Across the aisle, Jason lowered his gaze to the floor, the practiced confidence gone from his posture. For the first time, he looked small. Outside, as we stepped into the daylight, the victory felt fragile, like something we weren't yet allowed to celebrate. Reporters were beginning to gather near the courthouse steps, their cameras glinting in the sun. Nora told us to keep moving, her voice low. "It's only a first win, but it's an important one. They'll push back hard now. Be ready. We reached the car, and for the first time all day, Mom smiled a quiet, tired smile that spoke more of relief than triumph. The judge was fair, she said softly. That's all I prayed for. Then my phone buzzed. A single notification, no number. I almost ignored it, but the image preview stopped me cold. It was our kitchen, our actual kitchen taken from a high angle above the table. The same perspective as the old hidden camera we'd found weeks ago, the one in the ceiling vent that Owen had removed. But the timestamp in the corner read 10:43 a.m., the time we'd been sitting in the courtroom. My stomach turned to ice. I opened the photo fully. There was Mom's yellow teapot on the counter, the sunlight slanting through the same window we'd left closed this morning. No signs of a break-in, no message attached. Just the photo. Proof. I handed the phone to Nora, and for a moment she didn't speak. Then she drew a slow breath, her eyes scanning the timestamp. "This isn't old," she said. I nodded. My voice came out quieter than I meant it to. The camera was planted months ago, but that photo is from today. Someone was in the house while we were in court. After the photo from the kitchen, none of us slept. Nora arrived within an hour, her jaw set tight eyes scanning every inch of the house, like a surgeon looking for infection. The photo wasn't just a threat, it was proof of access of arrogance. "They were here today," she said quietly. "That means they think they still can be." It wasn't what she said next that chilled me. It was how calmly she said it. Then let's give them what they're looking for. Over the next 48 hours, Ruth's house became the stage for one final act, one we would direct this time. Nora brought in 2 technicians from her department, quiet men who carried duffel bags filled with equipment that looked ordinary until you saw the precision of it. Tiny cameras disguised as smoke detectors, outlet covers, light switch plates. Every lens was hardwired, feeding into a portable drive in an unmarked van parked half a block down. No Wi-Fi, no signal to trace, nothing that could be hacked. Owen supervised the setup, crawling under tables and into the crawl space to check wiring. I watched the process with a strange detachment, the same way you watch surgery through a glass window, fascinated and horrified all at once. When they were done, the house looked exactly the same, maybe even warmer than before. A lamp on in the living room, a half-folded blanket on the couch, a pair of slippers under the coffee table. Lived in, but not guarded. I helped stage the bait, a folder of unsigned documents left right in the center of the kitchen table, a yellow sticky note in my handwriting. "Mom, please sign these when you get a chance. H." Inside were blank pages formatted to look like legal contracts, marked with realistic but meaningless headers. The kind of thing someone desperate to finish what they started wouldn't be able to resist. Ruth agreed to stay with me for a few nights. She didn't argue, just looked around her home before we left and whispered, "Let's end it here." I nodded, not realizing then how literal that would become. The waiting was the hardest part. Surveillance meant stillness, patience. The van's interior smelled faintly of stale coffee and vinyl, the hum of the monitoring equipment blending with the distant sound of cars passing through the neighborhood. Nora sat beside me, headphones on, watching the split-screen feed of each hidden camera, kitchen, hallway, living room, back door. The hours dragged, every small sound amplifying in the quiet. Around 11, I thought maybe they wouldn't come. Maybe the risk had finally outweighed the reward. But Nora didn't look away from the screen. "They always come back," she said. "Arrogance doesn't quit. It just waits for darkness." At 11:47 p.m., the back door camera caught movement. 2 figures moving with practiced stealth entered using a key. No break-in, no shattered locks. They'd had a copy all along. The infrared camera rendered the scene in sharp monochrome, the woman's silver hair glowing like frost, her movements efficient, unhurried. Avery Dawson, and beside her a man in dark clothing, face covered by a black mask. Jason. My pulse thudded in my throat as the 2 of them crossed the kitchen. Avery didn't bother with hesitation. She moved like she'd done this a dozen times. She picked up the folder, flipped it open, and examined the blank documents. Perfect, she murmured. The cameras captured every word, every gesture. Jason stood at the table, pulling out a small handheld scanner and a digital camera. Make sure you get the pen in the shot, Avery instructed. And her glasses. It has to look like she was reviewing them. She placed Ruth's reading glasses on the table with a careful precision that sent a jolt through me. This wasn't theft. It was theater. They were creating evidence, crafting a story to overwrite the truth. Jason adjusted the light from his phone, the glow sweeping across the documents. Like this? He asked quietly. Avery nodded. Good. We'll say she signed them tonight. Maybe add a timestamp later, something clean. Make it look routine. She glanced toward the window where the streetlights cast long shadows. After tonight, it's over. They'll have nothing. Nora's voice was low but firm. We've got enough. She signaled into her radio. Teams 2 and 3 move. Outside headlights flickered to life in the distance. I couldn't look away from the screen. Avery and Jason were packing up when the first sound of tires on gravel reached the microphones. Avery froze, her eyes narrowing. She started to turn toward the door, but by the time she reached for the handle, the kitchen was flooded with light bright, blinding the sudden shout of police voices echoing through the house. Police, stay where you are. Jason bolted first, but 2 officers came through the back before he could reach the fence. Avery didn't move. She raised her hand slowly, almost gracefully, as if the whole thing had been inevitable. Don't touch anything, Nora barked as she entered, her tone clipped with control. Everything's evidence. I stood outside the doorway, the night air cold against my skin. Through the open window, I watched them handcuff Avery and Jason, their faces lit by the red and blue flashes bouncing off the kitchen walls. Jason's mask had slipped during the scuffle, and when the light hit his face, I saw the same boyish charm that had once fooled my mother, the soft edges of someone who'd learned to weaponize innocence. As the officer separated them, Avery turned her head, eyes finding his. I'm sorry, sweetheart, she said, her voice low, but caught by every microphone. I tried to keep you out of this. It wasn't shock that froze me, it was recognition. The way she said sweetheart, the maternal softness cutting through all that calculation. The word didn't belong to manipulation, it belonged to motherhood. Jason didn't answer. His expression was blank, a strange mix of resentment and relief. I thought of all those photos Mara had shown me Jason beside grieving widows, always with that same practiced empathy. And now it made sense. He wasn't just her partner, he was her creation. Raised in the language of deceit, trained in trust as a weapon. Maybe he'd never even had a chance to be anything else. When Avery was led past me toward the police van, she didn't look defeated. If anything, she looked relieved, like a performer whose final scene had landed exactly as written. She moved gracefully despite the handcuffs, her silver bracelets glinting under the streetlight, the same bracelets that had once shimmered in church halls and charity banquets. She paused as she was guided into the van, and for a moment, our eyes met through the narrow opening in the window. Her gaze was clear, unnervingly calm. You think you got the head? She said softly, her words slicing clean through the noise of radios and distant sirens. I'm just the hands. This doesn't end with me. The van door closed, and for a few seconds I could still see her silhouette framed by the dim light inside. The realization settled slowly, heavy and certain. This wasn't just a fraud ring. It was an institution. A network built on charm paperwork and silence. Avery hadn't created the game. She'd inherited it. And somewhere out there beyond the reach of our cameras and our warrants, someone else was still moving the pieces. Nora stood beside me, her expression unreadable. You did well, she said finally. We caught them clean. The footage, the confession, it's airtight. But I could hear the hesitation in her tone, the same unease coiled in my own chest. Airtight doesn't mean over, I said quietly. She nodded. No. It just means the air's thinner for them now. The street was quiet again, the house still and hollow, its windows reflecting the flashing lights like tired eyes. Somewhere inside Ruth's yellow teapot still sat on the stove untouched, waiting for a morning that felt impossibly far away. Avery's words still echoed in my head as the police van pulled away into the night. "You think you got the head? I'm just the hands." I stood there long after the sirens faded, watching the reflection of red and blue lights shimmer in the rain puddles on the street. There was no satisfaction, no triumph, only the uneasy sense that the ground beneath us had layers we hadn't yet seen. Nora was already on her phone before the van even turned the corner, speaking in clipped sentences that made me realize the night wasn't over, just redirected. "We move first thing in the morning," she said. "Search warrants approved. We hit the foundation office at 8. By dawn, the air was sharp and gray, the kind of morning that feels like paper-thin cold about to tear. The AD Foundation's official address turned out to be a small office suite in one of those modern professional buildings made of mirrored glass and beige stone, the kind that could just as easily house an accountant, a dentist, or a small charity. On the surface, everything looked ordinary: a framed mission statement about senior empowerment, a corkboard covered in photos of volunteers handing out meals, even a stack of newsletters thanking donors for their continued trust. But when Nora's team began opening drawers and file cabinets, the mask cracked wide open. They found property records for over 24 seniors' deeds, appraisals, notarized letters of authorization. Each file was meticulously labeled, color-coded, cross-referenced. On one shelf sat training binders labeled Client Engagement Protocol, filled with scripts and flowcharts. How to initiate conversation, how to identify recent widows, what emotional cues to look for. It wasn't charity, it was predation, disguised as kindness, systematized down to the language of empathy. Then came the ledgers. 3 thick binders bound in navy leather, their tabs worn from use. Inside, the numbers told the real story. 17 properties, total value $4.2 million. The transactions stretched across 3 years, each one moving through a different LLC before being donated to the foundation and then sold or refinanced. The profits were rerouted through consulting fees and shell corporations before landing in accounts under one name, Alan Deems. Nora flipped the binder around to show me the signature, neat, almost delicate handwriting. "He's the CFO," she said. "MBA from Purdue, no criminal record, no red flags. Runs 6 nonprofits. On paper, he's a model citizen." She looked up from the page. "He's the one who made this scale possible. Avery and Jason. They're the local face. He's the infrastructure." I stared at the photo clipped to his personnel file. A man in his 50s with a genial smile and kind eyes, the sort of face people instinctively trust. "How does someone like that end up here?" I asked quietly. Nora shrugged. "You'd be surprised how often charity draws wolves. It's the perfect hunting ground, no one audits compassion." Hours passed in a blur of evidence collection. I watched the agents photograph documents, pack hard drives, and label envelopes with quiet efficiency. Owen worked in the corner, his laptop connected to a confiscated computer, his expression focused but strangely conflicted. I thought he was just processing data until he looked up at me and said softly, "Can we talk?" We stepped into the hallway away from the low hum of activity. He glanced up and down the corridor before pulling a leather badge case from his pocket. "I owe you honesty," he said, flipping it open. The small gold seal caught the light Federal Bureau of Investigation. For a second, I didn't breathe. "I'm part of the Bureau's Financial Crimes Task Force," he said. "I've been undercover for 8 months tracking this specific fraud ring. My shop's real, my name's real, but this was my assignment." I must have looked stunned because he lifted his hands slightly as though to steady the air between us. "The beacon in your mom's documents, the tracking file, that wasn't just clever code. It was bureau tech. Legally authorized, fully compliant. Ruth gave consent, and that made it admissible evidence. That's how we traced the chain from Jason's laptop to the county recorder's office." I found my voice after a moment. "You lied to us." "I had to," he said simply. "Operational security. The fewer people who knew, the safer you all were. I wanted to tell you, but if word leaked..." He stopped shaking his head. Hannah, you don't understand how wide this thing is. Your mom's case wasn't isolated. We've had similar reports in Texas, Illinois, Oregon. Same paperwork, same structure, same language patterns in the correspondence. The ring's been adapting for years. I looked at him differently then, not with anger, but with the dawning realization that all of this had been larger than we'd ever known. So this was never just about Ruth, I said. No, he said quietly. But she gave us the proof we needed. Without her case, we couldn't connect the dots. You both helped end something that's been bleeding people dry for half a decade. There was something like guilt in his voice, too. A kind of weariness that made me see him less as an agent and more as a person who'd carried too many secrets. I nodded slowly. You did what you had to, I said. Just don't expect me to start calling you Agent Owen. His mouth lifted into the faintest smile. Fair enough. Later that afternoon, Nora called me into the evidence room. You should see this, she said. On the table lay a wallet, Avery's. Inside were her driver's license, a few folded receipts, and a worn birth certificate. Nora unfolded it carefully and pointed. Jason Mallory, it read. Mother Avery Dennings. My throat tightened. So it's true, I said. He's her son. Nora nodded. Born when she was 20. Different last name from a first marriage she never reported in her later records. She changed it after her license suspension 12 years ago. Kept the new name for her business operations. Jason's father died young, and by the time she rebuilt her life, she'd already learned the trade. Looks like she raised him into it. I stared at the faint ink on the paper, thinking of Jason's face when Avery called him sweetheart. The blankness hadn't been defiance, it had been the confusion of a man who couldn't decide if he was losing his mother or his leader. But the next item Nora laid on the table cut even deeper. It was a manila envelope labeled Personal, Legal Custody. Inside was a photocopy of a child's case file. Sophie Deems, Nora said softly. 8 years old, orphaned 2 years ago after a car accident. Avery's niece. She flipped to the last page, pointing to a section marked Provisional Guardian. My stomach turned when I saw the name Alan Deems. So he's been holding her over Avery, I said. Exactly. She's been working for him under threat, Nora confirmed. If she stopped cooperating, he could revoke his guardianship claim she was unfit. She's been protecting that little girl this entire time. I sat down hard, the weight of it all pressing down. That's why she never ran, I said quietly. All this time we thought she was the mastermind. But she was trapped too. Nora didn't argue. She's still responsible for her choices, she said, but it explains her desperation. People like Deems know how to find leverage, and they don't let go easily. When Avery was brought in for questioning later that evening, she looked different. The polish was gone. Her hair hung loose around her face, her wrists bare of jewelry. She didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't argue. She just sat down and said, You already know he's the one who runs it. Alan handles the money, the logistics, the training. I handled people. Jason handled relationships. I didn't want him in it, but Deems made sure we couldn't leave. Nora watched her carefully. You're saying Deems coerced you. I'm saying he owned us, Avery replied. And if you think arresting me ends this, you don't understand who's really in charge. The room went still. For once, there was no performance in her voice. No charm, no manipulation. Just fatigue and a mother's fury buried under it. When the interview ended, Nora walked me out into the hallway. She looked down at her phone, reading a message that had just come through. Her expression hardened. She turned the screen toward me. The text was from a bureau contact. Short, clinical. AD Foundation is one of 47 branches across 12 states. Alan Deems reports to someone higher. We're not done. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The hallway felt narrower, the air thinner. We had pulled back one mask only to find another beneath it. Avery had been right after all. We hadn't cut off the head. We'd only found the hands. The courtroom was larger than I expected, its high ceilings lined with heavy oak beams and chandeliers that had seen a century of justice before ours. Cameras were everywhere, news crews from local stations, bloggers, even a few national correspondents who'd scented the kind of story that made for easy headlines: elder fraud ring busted in Quiet Town. The public seats were packed shoulder to shoulder. I saw faces I recognized: neighbors, parish members, victims' families. And in the second row sat Mara Winters, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. Beside her were 3 other women whose mothers had lost their homes, each of them wearing that same expression of relief tempered by residual grief. This wasn't celebration. It was reckoning. The judge entered, and the murmurs quieted instantly. The prosecutor began his opening statement with the calm precision of a surgeon. This case, he said, is about trust, how it's built, how it's weaponized, and how it's stolen. Then came the evidence laid out piece by piece. Owen testified first, walking the court through the digital trail like a teacher guiding students through a puzzle. This software recorded every word typed, every password entered. He explained, his tone steady and clear. It wasn't hacking in the cinematic sense, it was patient observation. They didn't break in through a door. They sat quietly and watched through a window the victims didn't know existed. The jury nodded, following every slide, every timestamp. Next came the financial forensics team. They charted the flow of money with meticulous clarity, projecting diagrams that snaked across the courtroom screens, donations to the foundation, transfers to shell companies, then final deposits into offshore accounts labeled as consulting fees. Each figure was accompanied by an exhibit tag and a corresponding ledger page. No drama, just data. The power was in the orderliness of it all. There was no need to exaggerate. The numbers themselves were obscene enough. Then came Darla. When she walked to the witness stand, the room seemed to collectively exhale. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile in her beige suit, her hands trembling slightly as she was sworn in. But when she began to speak, her voice was steady. "I notarized documents for them," she said. "I thought it was routine legal work. I never met the homeowners. I didn't know their faces, only their signatures. I told myself it was harmless paperwork." Her eyes found Ruth in the audience and filled with tears. "It wasn't harmless. My seal, the one meant to prove honesty, was used to steal people's homes. I didn't just stamp paper. I stamped away lives." The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Marcus followed, nervous, pale, but determined. He described how he'd been paid under the table to push certain filings through without review. "I thought it was just bureaucratic shortcuts," he said. "I didn't understand what I was part of until I saw the names in the news." He swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone, but I did." The prosecutor nodded, neither condemning nor comforting. He simply let the confession stand on its own, a piece of the larger mosaic of manipulation. When Mara took the stand, even the judge leaned forward. Her voice was quiet, almost tender, as she spoke about her mother, the woman who'd lost her home and months later her life. "She didn't die of a stroke," Mara said softly. "That's what the medical report says, but it's not the truth. She died because she couldn't forgive herself for trusting someone who smiled at her while they took everything. She died because she felt stupid and alone and ashamed. That's what this crime does. It doesn't just take money. It takes dignity." Her words lingered in the stillness, heavier than any evidence exhibit. I saw one juror wipe his eyes discreetly with the back of his hand. By the time the prosecution rested, there was no tension left in the room, only inevitability. The defense attorney for Alan Deems tried to reframe the case as a management failure, arguing that Alan had delegated too much and been deceived by his subordinates. But that argument shattered when Avery's testimony began. She was pale, thinner than before, but composed. Her lawyer had negotiated a cooperation agreement, reduced charges, in exchange for full testimony and consideration in Sophie's custody petition. When she spoke, her voice was almost clinical. "Alan recruited me 3 years ago. He said he wanted to build a network of community liaisons, people who could help seniors transition their assets efficiently. He provided the lists, the language, the contacts. He told me which widows to approach and when. He had their donation records before I ever spoke to them. I was his mouthpiece. The prosecutor played recordings Avery had secretly made in the past 6 months, conversations between her and Alan, his voice cool and professional as he instructed her to get the paperwork moving and make sure the signatures matched the samples. There was even one call where he joked, if they're grieving, they won't read the fine print. The courtroom's collective gasp felt like a single drawn breath. When Alan took the stand, the pretense of innocence disintegrated. His lawyer tried to argue that the recordings were incomplete, taken out of context. But the judge's face hardened as she reviewed the transcripts. "This isn't context," she said. "This is conspiracy." She revoked his bail immediately, citing the offshore accounts and his clear capacity to flee. "The court orders full asset seizure," she declared. "All fraudulent property deeds are to be voided and ownership restored to the rightful holders. 7 families, 7 homes, including ours." The words sank in slowly, almost too enormous to process. After months of fear and humiliation, Ruth's house her sanctuary, her history was legally and irrevocably hers again. I looked at her as she sat in the audience, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She didn't smile, not exactly, but there was something in her expression I hadn't seen in months. Peace. Outside the courthouse, the air buzzed with reporters, their microphones thrust forward, questions overlapping. "Ms. Beck, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you believe justice was served?" I stood on the courthouse steps, the cameras bright and unrelenting, and took a deep breath. "Justice isn't loud," I said finally. "It's consistent. It's built by people doing the right thing even when it's hard. My mother was strong enough to ask for help. That's not weakness. That's courage." The reporters scribbled furiously, some nodding, others already moving to chase sound bites elsewhere. Emily stood beside me, no longer hiding behind her hair or her guilt. She'd been working with the FBI for weeks now, helping identify patterns in digital evidence and reaching out to potential victims through online communities. People listen differently when it's someone their age, she'd said once, and she was right. She'd started a blog sharing her story in plain language, what she'd missed, what she'd learned, what she wished she'd known. It had already saved 2 other women from falling into similar scams. As the crowd thinned and the news vans began to pull away, the adrenaline faded, leaving only exhaustion and the strange quiet that follows a storm. Ruth was surrounded by well-wishers, neighbors, church friends, even strangers thanking her for coming forward. I watched her laugh softly at something Mara said, her shoulders lighter than I'd ever seen them. For the first time in months, she looked like herself again. Emily touched my arm. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice low. We stepped aside, away from the courthouse noise, into the shadow of a marble column where the air was cooler and the cameras couldn't reach. She hesitated for a moment, then pulled a small envelope from her purse. Inside was an old brass key, tarnished but sturdy, the kind you'd use for a safe deposit box. "I found this in Dad's papers," she whispered. It was tucked in a file labeled Tax Year 2018. There was a note taped to it. She handed me the folded scrap of paper. On it, in our father's neat handwriting, were 3 words: "For emergencies only." I looked from the note to her, my pulse quickening. "You think it's connected?" "I don't know," she said. "But whatever's in that box, he wanted us to find it when things got bad. I'd say this qualifies." Behind us, the courthouse doors closed with a heavy final sound, but the weight I felt wasn't closure. It was anticipation. The kind that comes when one story ends and another begins. The brass key was heavier than I expected, cold against my palm, as if it still carried the memory of my father's hand. A week after the verdict, Emily and I drove with Mom to the small community bank where he'd kept his accounts for decades. The teller looked surprised when we presented the safe deposit key, but confirmed there was indeed a box still registered in his name. It hadn't been opened since 2022. The manager led us to a quiet back room and slid the metal drawer onto the table. For a moment, none of us spoke. Mom reached for my hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "He was always the cautious one," she said softly. If he left us something, it's because he knew we'd need it. Inside the box was a single envelope yellowed at the edges and a small folder of documents tied neatly with a rubber band. The envelope was addressed simply, "For my girls." Mom unfolded the letter carefully, the familiar looping handwriting instantly bringing back the scent of sawdust and coffee that always clung to him. "My dear family. If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I encountered a man named Jay Morrow in 2022 who asked suspicious questions about our home. I reported him to the church, but he disappeared. I'm leaving this information in case he returns under another name. Trust your instincts, Ruth. Girls, protect your mother. Some people see kindness as weakness. Prove them wrong." Attached to the letter were grainy photos clipped from church bulletins Jay Morrow and a woman he called his associate. Even in the low-resolution print, I could see the outlines of faces I now knew too well, Jason and Avery. The realization hit me hard. They'd been circling our lives for nearly a decade, changing names, changing tactics, always hunting. My father had seen them before we did. He'd tried to warn us across time. Mom pressed the letter to her chest, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "He knew," she whispered. "He always knew." It didn't feel like a mystery solved so much as a circle closed, one generation trying to protect the next. It was a reminder that vigilance wasn't new in our family. It was inherited. The discovery became the quiet foundation for what came next. When the restitution funds were finally released and donations began pouring in after the news coverage, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe we could turn all this hurt into something useful. With Owen's help, we set up the paperwork for a new nonprofit, Elder Justice Homes. We started with 3 goals that felt both simple and monumental. First, to buy back homes that had been sold at auction due to fraud and return them to the original owners or their families at cost. Second, to install practical home security locks, cameras, motion lights for at-risk seniors who didn't understand modern scams. Third, to hold free digital safety workshops in libraries and senior centers, teaching the basics of online awareness in plain English. I wanted every Ruth Beck out there to feel what my mother now felt, prepared instead of afraid. Mara joined as director, her grief now channeled into a fierce determination that gave the organization its heart. She had a way of speaking that drew people in, calm, kind, but utterly unwavering. She often said, "We can't stop people from being kind. We just have to help them be careful." Within 6 months, we'd helped 12 families reclaim stolen homes and trained more than 200 seniors in digital safety. Seeing their faces light up when they realized they could take control of their own security made all the late nights worth it. For once, prevention felt more powerful than punishment. Jason's name appeared in the papers again briefly when his sentencing was finalized. He'd accepted a plea deal, 5 years in prison with mandatory counseling and cooperation in exposing the broader network. The prosecutors had recognized what we already suspected: he'd been born into the scam, molded by a mother who blurred the line between love and control. His testimony led to the arrest of several mid-level coordinators across 3 states. Avery's 8-year sentence felt both too much and too little, but there was some mercy woven into it. The judge allowed her provisional custody of Sophie through supervised visits, citing her cooperation and the evidence of coercion by Alan Deems. When I saw the photo of Avery in the paper holding Sophie's hand during a visitation break, her face looked older, stripped of vanity, but there was something human in her eyes at last. Maybe guilt, maybe relief. Darla kept her promise too. She lost her notary license permanently, but instead of fading into bitterness, she joined Elder Justice Homes as a volunteer. She speaks at every workshop, telling seniors how easily she was drawn in and how to recognize red flags before it's too late. If something feels off, she tells them it probably is. And you don't owe anyone your trust just because they're polite. Her humility gives her more credibility than any expert could ever have. Owen, or Agent Owens as I sometimes teasingly call him, stayed in touch. He'd send occasional updates, short matter-of-fact emails about ongoing investigations. The last one mentioned that several of Alan Deems's offshore accounts had led to an international financial network now under joint investigation by the FBI and Interpol. His work was far from over, but his tone had softened. "Your family's case," he wrote, "became our training model for community cooperation. It's changing how we handle elder fraud nationwide." It wasn't closure exactly, but it was something sturdier progress. 6 months later, on a late spring afternoon, Mom's house was full again. Not with police or investigators, but with life. The living room buzzed with conversation as women from our digital safety program gathered for coffee and snacks, swapping stories about how they'd outsmarted new scam calls or spotted fake emails pretending to be from Social Security. Emily stood near the kitchen counter with her camera capturing moments for our nonprofit's newsletter. Her blog had grown into a community of thousands, and she was working with libraries across the state to develop online safety guides tailored for seniors. Watching her laugh easily again, I realized she had found her redemption not in forgetting, but in teaching. Mom moved through the crowd like the hostess she'd always been, offering coffee refills and gentle conversation. When she caught my eye, she smiled a simple, steady smile that carried months of rebuilding behind it. Around her neck hung a silver chain with my father's old brass key polished to a quiet shine. She wore it not as a talisman against fear, but as a symbol of endurance. The house itself had changed 2 new locks, a modest alarm, and a small hand-painted sign near the door that read, "Welcome, but be wise." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, I stood in the doorway watching the last of the sunlight fade through the curtains. The laughter inside had replaced the silence that used to hang like a shadow in these rooms. Mom joined me, locking the door with her usual care. The click sounded final but comforting. She looked at me thoughtfully. "Your father's letter was right," she said. "Some locks keep danger out, but the best security is knowing who you let in." I nodded, my throat tight. We stood there for a long moment, listening to the hum of the house settling around us, warm and alive again. And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't dared to hope for, peace that didn't come from walls or alarms, but from trust, rebuilt one careful door at a time. The story of Hannah, Ruth, and Emily comes to an end, but its echoes remain a quiet reminder that trust is the most precious gift we can give, and also the one most easily taken. If you've ever witnessed or experienced something similar, share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe kindness and caution can coexist? We'd love to hear your perspective. If this story made you think differently about protecting your loved ones or rebuilding after betrayal, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next story where justice, family, and inner strength intertwine. Your support helps us continue bringing meaningful stories that reach hearts, spark awareness, and remind us that even after loss, there's always light to be found in one another.